Journalistic ethics for the uncompromising fight, resistant to the constant pulls that yank us left and right. He's a man without a party, a guy without a place, a true rebel outsider, never cave into the state. Objective, honest, ethical, the raw truth torches carried on by the last American vagabond. He can't sign off on genocide, he can't consent to force, won't take the state's abuse, wants government divorce. He pauses propaganda, breaks the news without the slant. Globalists are seething, but behold the people's chant. Objective, honest, ethical, the raw truth torches carried on by the last American vagabond. The guy's got unyielding principles, hell can't be mad at that. Hope we see him round these parts again, have another higher side chance. Yeah, he parses propaganda, breaks the news without the slant. Globalists are seething, but behold the people's chant. Objective, honest, ethical, the raw truth torches carried on by the last American vagabond.
And going back to Mike Wagenheim, Mike, just in the past hour, the Trump team confirming the pick of Mike Waltz as the National Security Advisor. And I don't want to exaggerate and say that Israel, the government here, and its supporters are breathing a sigh of relief over these picks, but certainly I think some of the concerns they had about the next administration have been eased by picking certainly these three, and especially Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, people who have, for example, spoken with I-24 News just in recent months about their strong support of Israel and their concerns over Iran.
Not just breathing a sigh of relief, Colin. They're dancing the horror right now at the Prime Minister's office with these selections by Donald Trump. I mean, we were expecting some isolationists possibly in those positions, or maybe some who lean at least a little bit toward Trump's new foreign policy and the Maga foreign policy. Hasn't been that case at all. I mean, Rubio and Mike Waltz are in the mold of old school Republicans on policy, both pro-Israel stalwarts to the hilt. They'll challenge anybody who views the situation otherwise. I mean, you couldn't have selected two better picks, I think, if you're sitting in the Prime Minister's office right now. And Elise Stefanik will be a firebrand at the United Nations. She already told Isaac Herzog in a meeting this morning that she'll have Israel's back there. And we didn't expect otherwise, but always good to hear that if you're within the Israeli government in a very problematic institution like the UN. By the way, Marco Rubio told us last Tuesday at Donald Trump's watch party on election night that he would, with the Republicans taking over the Senate, not knowing then that he would be nominated likely for Secretary of State, he said that the Republican Senate should take up defunding more UN agencies that he feels are either in cahoots with Hamas or turn a blind eye to those terror organizations that operate in Gaza and elsewhere.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. One laser focus for the show today with, I guess, maybe a small few deviations, but the main focus of today being the obvious nature of the Israel First cabinet picks for Donald Trump thus far. Now, like I've been saying the last 3-4 shows around this topic, if you're actually listening to the conversation, the nuance, the information, as opposed to the 240 character view and assumption around it all, anybody honest about this has been saying very clearly, we don't know for sure about any of these things, even if Trump comes out and personally says that's the case and the person comes out and personally accepts it. We still have to go through these next few months, the potential Senate confirmations. I mean, any number of things could shift. So and then on top, or even I guess not on top of that, but before that, obviously we have to be wondering whether these are lies, whether it could be shifting dynamics about who's driving these choices from Trump's perspective, or as I said in general about I forget which one it was, but ultimately the point where I'm thinking it could be something coming from Israel or something coming from the left versus the right or the right versus the left. And there's a lot of information. There's a lot of very clear interest in all of this. And so my point is that with Marco Rubio being one of the early ones, you can hear Israel cheering about that. You can hear Fox News talking about it, but still it's the right thing to point out that we don't know for sure because it comes from corporate media, basically corporate media reporting this without really finding out where the source comes from kind of inside. So as always, we don't know that for sure. But what's interesting is I have examples of people on the right of the conversation that are saying, for example, that they're super excited about Massey being chosen. Well, that hasn't happened. That's just as up in the air as, that's actually far less definitive than even Marco Rubio. But what I want to highlight is that this is usually how the partisan game goes, that ultimately they will try to hype, and maybe even like I said the other day about whether the right conservatives, let's say, that want to try to pressure the administration to choose who they want and might be floating names and getting momentum behind it in order to try to pressure that. Completely a thought that I had, nothing that I can back that up with. But that it could be something that, that kind of idea, or it could be that they just want you to think so for other reasons, but that ultimately they will praise the ones that they think are happening, even if it isn't definitive, while denouncing the ones they don't like, especially if it's in this moment where they can say, we don't know that for sure. But this is the frustration of the people that try to be objective about this. Today, we're going to focus on what we know for sure. Most of it, which is, like I said, still up in the air. But what we do know for sure is most of these picks that we're going to go over today, maybe save for Rubio, are ones that have been acknowledged by Donald Trump, posted on Truth Social and Twitter, and then in many cases accepted by the person being discussed. But even then, like I said, it's just as likely that the Senate could decide to push back on that. That's one thought that I had about specifically RFK Jr. As for those maybe new to the show, just to very quickly point out, my opinion is that this is not, there are left and right dynamics. There are different political stances, different desires for how the country should go. But ultimately, in my mind, there's just the government. And that's not even to say that everybody in Congress knows that. But I very strongly believe that ultimately we have an agenda that your government is carrying out. The left-right paradigm is a way to sort of keep you from pointing at the true problem instead of pointing at your neighbor. And a lot of other nuance around that for how it works to keep you pacified, distracted. The feeling you checking a box every 4 years is all you need to do. But I think ultimately, if there's just one government entity and agenda, and you can look at it that way, it kind of simplifies what we're staring at here. I think it's about technocracy. I think it's about a pro-Israel agenda. And a lot of this is about trying to get you to be okay with these choices when all of them are going in the same direction. One of the reasons people floated the idea, the possibility that Trump and the rest of them could have pointed to Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley only in order to push them aside. So then when you feel better about the other rabidly Zionist choices, which in my opinion, just because Mike is so out in the front, alarmingly bad, most of these choices are just as dangerous and bad for the same reasons. It's not even just being pro-Israel. It's about their policy. It's about their Israel first objective at the expense of Americans. And this is not something that most conservatives or even Republicans want to, well, none of them want to admit it, I would argue, but want to even embrace or recognize is there because it is completely contradictory to everything this movement stands for. I mean, there's some alarming stuff we're going to go through today. Some really, really stand out on the surface, not just pro-Zionist, but prophetic Zionist mentality. Like the idea that these are the chosen people, or the idea that we have to rebuild the third temple, or these are things that are like, whatever you think about them, no matter how much you think the point is they're based in a prophetic mindset that is not based in fact, not based in politics, not based in something we can prove, not international law, that's for sure. And this is coming from an American politician. These things are very alarming. That's why I wanted to start with that clip around Israel doing a jig over there about how these people are in power because, or at least being pointed to, Marco Rubio being one of them, despite most of the MAGA movement saying that's not true. And I hope it's not, quite frankly, but showing you how much this is in the interest of Israel. Now, I want to quickly, before we get into that main discussion today, we're pretty much just going to go one by one. And if you know any that pop up while I'm on, I mean, I even just saw Matt Gaetz being pointed to before I came on, so I added that. But there's a lot going on and a lot up in the air. But if you see anybody coming out that's worthy of note, make sure you put it in the chat. I hope I see it. Let me know. But I wanted to make sure the two things we started with, actually, I'll start with this first since this is what we opened with. If you were there early enough and you heard this song, I'm really honored to point out this is a song that was put together by Greg from Higher Side Chats. It used it as the ending for the interview that we just did. And so here, this link will be included, which I'm not sure how it works with Dropbox. Like, I believe it's a public link, but he may end up taking it down. I'm going to try to, first and foremost, I have that link, so I'm going to be using it going forward. And just huge shout out to Greg. I really do think I'll always love our conversations. I think he's a great guy, and I'm really honored that he would make this. But on top of that, that I want somebody like the last one. If you're out there and you want to put something to this and make a music video for it, go have at it. Send it to me. If I like one, I'll decide to use it for the video for this going forward. You know, and then really, again, I want something that is more not just kind of a montage of images, but do what you think fits the song. But I'd love to see something, really some cool effort put into it around TLAV work or whatever. But either way, huge shout out to Greg. I think this is fantastic. And here's the interview we had, which, by the way, this is one thing I really love about talking with him is that there's points that we can clearly are not necessarily feeling the same about what we're discussing. And that's fantastic. One, that we can have a disagreement and still have an amicable conversation. On top of that I'm looking forward to joining him again next time. And this is where we all need to be. And it's a point we make all the time. You can see that's not how partisans conversations are. I personally fall into that trap myself all the time. And I have a point I'll make about that. We all need to strive to be better. The whole thing I used to say all the time, right? It's something someone taught me when I was growing up that's always stuck with me, right? It's not about being the best every day or accomplishing everything. It's just about being a little bit better than yesterday. If you make that a mantra in your life, that just today, it's just, in general, I feel I'm a little bit better than I was yesterday. I did this better. I tried harder. I was nicer to people, whatever it is. And if you can say that, well, you're going to continue to be a better person and stronger. In fact, whatever you're aiming at being better at, it will continue. And so I think that's the kind of ideas that when it comes to the content online, the engagements, it's easy to get pulled into it. And I think from my perspective, because I think there's a lot of very dishonest people who are very intentionally trying to manipulate, trying to anger. And it really makes me angry. It makes me frustrated for different reasons. But either way, the point is that's what they want out of you. So just online, and I'll read that tweet in a minute. It's important that we always try to do that. And that's one thing I feel like I really appreciate with his work, that he having us on to talk about it. And frankly, we agree on most conversations, but this was more so about the discussion, which I think is important to have a balanced and not aggressive conversation about, if possible, of whether or not it was the right thing to lean into Trump's administration, or whether it's the right thing to feel that even through the political system, we can make a difference. We go into all sorts of stuff. And frankly, I'm not the best one to really get into like how we would build the new world without a state. I'm still evolving my thoughts on how the actual groundwork on it. But I very much believe in these ideas about why that doesn't have to be the case. We get into it briefly. My point is all the conversation we have is about a difference around that. And my opinion, I'm very, very much on the side that this is not going in the direction we think it is. While at the same time, as I stressed throughout the show, holding out hope that you're right. And that's where people tend to kind of dismiss that. Like that's just a carry-on point that doesn't really, I believe that. I genuinely mean that I want, because again, why wouldn't we? I feel like people in the partisan field project that kind of pettiness onto our people that genuinely want positive things and want to have an amicable conversation. We should hope that he is what they think he is, even if that angers you because you hate Donald Trump. We should want the good thing for everybody. But I think, as we'll go through today and show you, I don't think that's where we're going. And just because that's not what people want, or because that's not positive view, doesn't mean we should ignore it. Sometimes things in the world aren't positive. Sometimes where we're going is negative. And to reach the positive outcome, we have to embrace that first. Now, I also want to point out a new shirt that we put out on that exact idea, and a big shout out to Big Frog in general. And here on the website, you can always find this under TLAV Apparel, Big Frog Clothing. Now, again, as I told you before, Truth Clothing is on the way out. They're trying to sell out the last of the, actually, I'll try to remember and add that for you. I should have done that first. They're on the way out. So basically, they're trying to get rid of all the extra stock. Everything's on sale. So make sure you check that out. It helps TLAV. It helps their company as they shift into the next phase of what they're doing, which I believe is not in this field anymore, but wish the best for them. And most of these things we're going to basically duplicate in slightly different ways for the new site. So because a lot of these are their ultimate designs. I imagine they wouldn't care that much anyway, but ultimately we will have most of this stuff, stickers included, coming on the new site, which will all be here once this one goes away, which is on this website, it's tlavfreespeech.itemorder1word.com. And I think that's it. Let me see if that works there. Yeah, good. Okay, so that's the little bit of an odd URL, but it pops up for you. But so this is the site for the new shirt. Now, this is a tagline that I think, or like a phrase that I really appreciate, something that I made special for somebody on a journal, a few of us actually, a while back. Somebody who's no longer with us, who was kind of a really positive influence on me coming through this and finding my path. And the shirt simply says Vincent Omnia Veritas. And then underneath it says Last American Vagabond. The back says Question Everything, which simply means truth conquers all things. Now, that's the exact translation, usually broken down to just truth conquers all. But I think it's the word everything, which is usually, the original. And so it's kind of truth conquers all things. But either way, I think that's a powerful thing to think about today, right? And so if this is another shirt, you want to support TLAV, you can check it out for yourself. And on the website, if you go through and look, oh, it's not getting there for me. Anyway, there's other shirts on there that you guys have seen. I don't know what's going on with this thing right now. Back to this. We have the Free Speech Absolutist shirt, which says I support TLAV on the back, and then the one that just says the hierarchy enslaving you. So check it out. Plenty of good stuff to get there. I rarely focus and hype these things because I just don't like to, frankly, but it's out there if you want to support us. And I love these things. I think they're good ideas, and I think the shirts are great. So great song. Thank you, Greg, again. Great interview. Make sure you check it out. This was the point that I was saying a second ago, to get into this to start, just to rather to end this opening part. I said this on Wake Up, but this really kind of resonated with me as inversionism is just making a point, going back, kind of disagreeing with what Zuby said and simply saying that it's our responsibility to reach people and do the best to kind of build, find a common ground. That the main point that I want to walk away from this with is that the idea of this is very important. That if you're getting in heated arguments, combatively, aggressively going back and forth, that you're in a lot of ways pushing people away. And I myself can learn from, trying not to get in, especially online, that the real point, and I've made this many times, is if you're trying to reach people, if your goal is to inform and change people's minds, as Derek has said recently, using the word sheep and normie and, denigrating someone, even if you're right, even if you believe you're right, is obviously going to make people dig in further. And so about the online and trying to be, planting the seeds and doing so in a cordial way, even if people are being ridiculous. My point is, we know a lot of people are never, I argue intentionally there to manipulate, but that doesn't change. We don't know who and where. And the point is, as I say here, this is very important. And we all need to hear it, myself more than ever. It is so easy to get baited or drawn into the negativity or vitriol, especially on Twitter. We need to ask ourselves, is our goal to dunk on those we see as wrong, or is it to awaken them to the truth? And if it is to awaken them to the truth, then the person out there who might actually be willing to listen to you, but you come up in a way that makes them feel stupid, they probably won't. Most people won't. So again, I'm being quite honest. I'm speaking to myself more than anybody, because I get pulled into these things online, and I think we can always grow every day about being a little bit better than yesterday. Don't be this guy. That's the moral of the story. This guy, Rick Taylor, says, my aunt called about Thanksgiving plans. During the conversation, she mentioned she voted for Trump. I told her my home is not open to traitors and I would not go to theirs. Guys, I mean, not only is this like embarrassingly small, the idea that you would choose to box out family because of a political, guys, this is because you have internalized these choices, these political ideas as who you are as a person. Not only do I find that embarrassing and just stupid, it is exactly what they want from you. They being the hierarchy enslaving you, for the acronym. So just think about this. And it goes both ways, obviously. But in this case, this seems to be a Democrat angry that she voted for Trump. And for the point is, I mean, you get it. I just really hope that we can see how bad and how like low this is, how small this is. And this is what, if we're driven to this position, the fact that it would make you turn on your grandmother, I mean, that's almost like or an aunt, excuse me. It's same dynamic. It just shows you how bad this has gotten. And I do not want to believe this is most people. So let's start today with a quick point about East Palestine before we get into the real discussion about where we're going. And there's a great clip that Nashville Angela shared about democracy versus the constitutional republic, which I do find very important for today. And I'm glad I saw it today. And I'm not going to play the whole clip, but just the part about it, which we all know. I'm sure you already know where that's going. We don't live and we shouldn't live in a democracy. It is a tool, as he discusses, of authoritarians to trick you into, guess what, where we are. And right now, you're going to hear that more. You won't hear that more than any. You will hear that more than from anybody else right now from people like Elon Musk, Donald Trump. The word democracy is just coming out everywhere, even though mostly Republicans are the ones that in the past used to point out that it's not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. But it's weird how these things get given a pass because it's Elon Musk or it's Donald Trump, or in the other reverse, it's Obama or it's Biden or whatever. People tend to ignore the obvious when it comes to the people that they choose to believe in. Which is crazy to me, right? Because if you're choosing to believe in somebody, shouldn't that mean that you're harder on them? That you hold their feet to the fire more than anybody because you know that they, or at least you tell yourself they are the better one, or they could be. But no, it seems today it goes the opposite. When it's somebody who you've decided to lean into, it's like you just ignore all the problems. Now, I'm speaking specifically about the partisanship, which I'm hoping is a dwindling idea. But this is interesting, by the way, before we get into that. I just wanted to point this out before we go forward. So I was making points about Georgia, and I just recently did another focus on that, which I don't think we should be ignoring. Prolonged illness is right up until a couple days ago. People are still suffering there. I still genuinely think this could be one of the largest, if not the largest, dioxin disasters in history, and no one's even talking about it. Now, this is not my personal, this is based on the facts on the ground and the chlorine compounds. As Scott Smith points out, about 2 million chlorine compounds burned in East Palestine. We're looking at something between 12 and 20 pounds of chlorine compounds. This is a real issue, and it blows me away that no one's talking about, but that's not for today. Actually, and since I bring that up, I'll make sure I include at least one of the articles so you can dig further in that. Actually, here, I'll do this while this is loading. The last one, I think, was right here. That's the one I want you to look at. So I posted this on the 12th. It says, and what's interesting is the post is gone. Weirdly, it doesn't even show it. It's like it just vanished. It says, as I said, not only were they unscathed after East Palestine, but they seem to have benefited from it. And I posted an article that I had, and it deleted itself. Whatever, just they deleted it, but then they reposted it. Now, who knows? Maybe they had a typo, except the fact that I have a screenshot. It's exactly the same post. So I don't know. I'm not excited. I think it's interesting that maybe they didn't like that I tagged this with information that shows that they lied, but who knows? Maybe that's just my assumption or my thought. But either way, what's interesting is they're going, so far this year, 94 customers have started shipping with us for the first time. New business. We're doing well. And this is my frustration. Is that ultimately the point? That's what by the way, I just captioned it and did it again. They lied about this. Alan Shaw lied about the reality of this. The controlled burn, which it wasn't, was vinyl chloride, but it was treated vinyl chloride. Their own experts said this. They withheld this information. They kind of muscled the guy into choosing to do the burn. And the whole bottom line, this came out in open court. The point is this information's there. And not only did people in East Palestine are still suffering. The original whistleblower that reached out to Scott, she's not even alive anymore. There's so many things that we could prove that they did. And as far as I know, most people there didn't even get the benefits they claim were coming to them. So all I'm saying is that this is the reality of how this goes. And by the way, this is the kind of business mindset that Donald Trump's team is bringing to the table. And that's not my opinion. They're very clear about how they look at this stuff. Either way, they benefited after allowing it to happen. And I want people in Georgia to recognize where they should be going about this, how they should be going about this, because I believe these people, if you just let these things go on month by month by month, eventually gets to a point to where there's really no doing. I mean, right now, trying to go at East Palestine for some cancer you have, there's no way that they would be able to connect. And that's on purpose, even though we know that we're dealing with this. So I just want to highlight that. I thought that was interesting. And I'll include this other episode that we just did on this so you can follow up. But speaking of this, and this is my whole worry about where we go, and it's not just about fascist corporate overlap. It's all of these things. It's about where all of this is going. And it's not just Trump. This is just the chosen entity in my mind to lead us into this point. Biden and Kamala did the exact same thing. And so it's a stage, and they built up, they grabbed the baton from Trump's administration that began the Operation Warp Speed. It's an ongoing process. That's my point about it just being a government concept. Now, this is something Nashville Angela pointed out. And I want you to really think about this, because right now we're dealing with this. And it's not even just about the word democracy versus constitutional republic. It's about how this stage has gone. And we are in a position right now where they're using the illusion that you live in this, or even the idea, if you want to take it that way, that we live in a democracy, which again is the point he's making in this clip, that is the manipulation. We're in a position where they use not necessarily the idea of the constitutional republic, where we have actually influence over the outcome of every level of this, but rather that as long as they get you to vote for them in presidents, they can do whatever they want because, majority. Ultimately, democracy, and what he's highlighting is that we can go through this process and then the power structure acts as it will. And we know this already from the Princeton study, from the obvious reality of what we can see happening, from the way that they talk about it publicly. Now, the difference would be what he's going to describe, but we are walking blindly into this forward with them just pretending like they're doing your will. Like Republicans right now, conservatives, recognize not a single person being put on this in front of you are people that you were discussing. Outside of the core Republican dynamic, most people talking about make America great again, talking about the outsider, bringing down the deep state, or destroying the three-letter agencies, none of that is what this represents. So ask yourself, is this a representative dynamic where you are giving them what you want and they're carrying it out? Or do we live in this democracy where they just go, good, you gave us the power, now we're going to make the choices? It's not as simple as that. I mean, frankly, probably is, but here's what he has to say about this. And I believe that's what we're dealing with.
A constitutional republic, not a democracy. The ideal of a democracy.
Oh, and I'm, in case you don't know that, which I'd imagine most of you do, this is the reality, or really a constitutional republic, right? The point is, and I think, is that what he's...
Not a democracy. A constitutional republic.
Or a democratic republic, or the different, or a constitutional republic, to make sure that is the idea of what this country was founded on. That's what I want to make sure you understand. The term democracy is a manipulation. I mean, it's not, this is as he's going to highlight the way this has been manipulated, we should be demanding that we have what this country was founded on. The switch to democracy as a term was the ploy.
Not a democracy. A constitutional republic, not a democracy. The ideal of a democracy is universal equality. The ideal of a constitutional republic is individual liberty.
Sorry, I didn't mean to pause that. I was trying to miss. But so listen to that real quickly. The main point is the difference between equality versus rights and liberty. Isn't that perfect for where we are right now? I mean, literally, even coming off the conference we just did, or the idea of the so-called election or the selection, the idea is that I would argue, or I mean, it's pretty clear, most conservatives would hear the first part of that and think left, woke. So, all the world or all of the kind of conversations that come to some equality, they call it communism or whatever else. And it's interesting is that seems to be what they're pointing at today. And you can clearly point out to all these weird kind of utopia mindsets coming out of the fake libertarian side of the technocracy behind them. It's amazing the things people ignore when it's something they don't want to see.
Universal equality. The ideal of a constitutional republic is individual liberty. A democracy always degenerates into dictatorship, which promises government-guaranteed equality and security, but it delivers nothing but poverty and serfdom for the people it robs and rules.
They could disagree with how he frames that, but isn't that interestingly just like what the right would point at when they talk about communism and socialism? For me, it's just government. I see all government the same way. It all ends up in this position. That's why I'm the no state mindset. Either way, at least with part of that, I do agree. But it's also democracy, and it's also the rest of it. That's what he's talking about.
America was founded as a constitutional republic to safeguard the liberties of the people against the tyranny of democracy or of one-man dictatorship. In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, the totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of our principles of government. That is a summary of my report on a constitutional republic, not a democracy. The full report after a message from my sponsor. A democracy is a political system in which the people periodically, by majority vote at the polls, select their rulers. The rulers then have absolute power to make whatever laws they please by majority vote among themselves. In a constitutional republic, the people also, by majority vote at the polls, select rulers who make laws by majority vote among themselves. But the rulers cannot make any laws they please because the Constitution severely restricts their lawmaking power. The ideal of a democracy is universal equality. The ideal of a constitutional republic is individual liberty. In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic and transforming it into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of American principles of government. Note the following passages from a recent article distributed by the New York Times News Service. Quote, "In the United States and in other leading democracies, recent years have seen perceptible growth in executive authority. As society becomes more equalitarian, it tends increasingly to concentrate absolute power in the hands of one single man. This is a voluntary surrender of a free people escaping from freedom to one autocratic master." End quote. And note the following.
And whether you agree with it or not, history is making that clear right now. We're watching that happen throughout the experiment of this country. It's obvious to see how we've centralized power under a guise of this or that, or risk from this country or that country, or, it's all, whatever the justification. That's always how that's why even from our founding fathers, whatever you think of the origin point, have made it clear that that kind of exchange is never in your interest. Security for freedom, right? The reality, or the security for, why am I blank for this? The idea of simply exchanging one for the other. The point is you deserve neither. I'm just getting on the words.
From Gunnar Myrdal's An American Dilemma, quote, "In America, liberty often provided an opportunity for the stronger to rob the weaker.
Security, liberty. Sorry. Just
Against this, the equalitarianism in the American creed has been persistently revolting. And in the conflict between equality and liberty, equality is slowly winning. In America, conservatism has to a great extent been perverted into a cult of the Constitution.
Look at that.
This is unfortunate since the Constitution is in many respects impractical and ill-suited for modern conditions. The worship of the Constitution is also a most flagrant violation of the American creed. The Constitutional Convention was nearly a plot against the common people." End quote. Now, Gunnar Myrdal, a Swedish socialist, was hired by the Carnegie Corporation of New York in 1937 to direct a study of the Negro in the United States. He engaged a large staff, some of them communists and pro-communists. An American Dilemma resulted, first copyrighted in the United States in 1944. In 1954, the Supreme Court handed down a school segregation decision, which deliberately violated the Constitution, reversed a previous Supreme Court decision, and lit a fuse touching off explosive violence, which has been shattering our society ever since. The court cited An American Dilemma as one of the modern authorities on which it relied in preference to the Constitution for justification of its decision. An American Dilemma, written by a Swedish socialist, provided a basic rationale for the conversion of our free republic into an equalitarian democracy.
Now, I'll leave it there. It's a really fascinating clip, and there's a lot of different points to be made. And I'm sure you'll disagree with something in this video. What's interesting, though, is that you can see how these things can work. And my mind, again, to make it clear, is that in any level of power structure, whether with the Constitution or not, in a sense, right? But in the conversation of being where we are today, idea that the Constitution restricts their law, passing laws. It's not that it's some kind of brick wall that they cannot pass. Of course, they can just choose to ignore that, just like any law. A guy can go out and kill somebody. Doesn't mean they might not end up being held accountable for it. The point is that it does, in effect, does actually restrict what they're able. They just don't care. Right? The more criminal you get, the more authoritarian and totalitarian. The point is these things, it's like your constitutional rights in general. It's a point we make all the time. They're inherent. That doesn't mean that they choose to acknowledge them or they disregard them often. Nonetheless, you can still point to it and say that this does have that effect if it were being acknowledged. But again, it's the same point as anything. Like, unless we're talking about like the people literally like chaining people's, there's nothing in the world that will ultimately make it an absolute that because of this has to happen unless you're chained to the wall. And so I think this is where you go back to the idea without a state, the idea that a society would ultimately self-regulate. There will always be violence. There will always be problems. But the point is that seems to be in any dynamic, you'll always have people that don't choose to follow it. And the point is with something like that, at the very least, you don't have centralized power that can choose to ignore it in a way that will be insurmountable or, you can go off on it forever. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Either way, the point is that the main point in the beginning is the conversation of the slow change of the terminology for interest of the people to circumvent even the small things that we have to effectively point out that they're violating not just your inherent constitutional rights, but human rights. Now, she points out, if you or someone you know has ever said America's a democracy, please listen to the video. It says your job and who you care and understand is to help educate others. Dan Smoot. Now, it's an interesting point about the whole thing. And I think is interesting is that we do have a lot of people pointing to this. Now, my bigger thing about Elon Musk and the rest of it, and I personally just find it really hard to ignore how obvious it is. Like, just for example, and this is it's a subjective point. It's people that want to see it a certain way will see it the way they want to see it. But this image alone, to me, it's like, it screams, he's playing a role. It's like somebody who doesn't know how to act what they would think as cool in front of people they see as cool. It's not what I'm saying he thinks it as. I'm trying to think of an example where you have somebody trying to pretend like they're hip around everybody else and it just feels awkward and it feels like they're performing, like they're forcing it. That's what he feels like every time he's on the stage for me. And again, the analogy is just to place it in your mind about how people would act. Who knows why he's doing it? Who knows how he perceives you? Frankly, I think that he's making fun of you. I think that he's playing this role and he's behind the scenes laughing about how easy it is to just put on a hat and act a certain way and people fall over themselves. And I don't even think that's most conservatives, quite frankly. I think that's a very core element of this that is driving the conversation. To me, I just get this very strong sense that it's about trying to play a role to convince you for the next stage of all of this, which that's what people call black-pilled or whatever else, when ultimately, I'm pointing it, by the way, we'll get to in a second, literally the richest man on the planet. Quite the outsider, right? I'm sure, but of course we can hope for that. I mean, why wouldn't we have a very powerful entity that just decides to buck the system that he literally works for and is aligned with and overlapped with in every possible way of his life? But of course we should hope that. But I'm not the kind of person that just goes, look, he said this on stage. Woohoo, we're going to get it all. Or Trump floats a very basic idea that then we go on pretending like we know it's going to happen. No, we don't. He could mean that and then change his mind, or he could be lying. We all can know this when it comes to something we're not passionately invested in. The reality is clear that these people they demonstrate everything that this group pretends they're fighting. Yes, again, we can hope that they decided to fight for you, but the actions are different. Their past is different. What they're currently saying, what they're currently doing on the platforms and censoring people, it's obvious that that's not the point of what you're saying. But then, yes, still we can hope for it. But for those to argue we know it's happening or it will or already is, it's just simply not true. Very much so. Now, he points at something to one of his little, one of these lackeys on Twitter that seem to all point at the same things and laugh at the same things and tag each other back and forth. Ian Miles Chong says, Meloni's government in Italy will not be allowed to deport illegal aliens, according to judges who just ruled against her decision. They cited how Egypt has a poor human rights record, and therefore sending illegals from Egypt back to their home country would potentially violate their human rights, so it cannot be done. Now, there's a valid point to be made in there, regardless of what you think about how this goes in regard to why people who are in most cases fleeing foreign policy of these very people, whether it's the U.S. or UAE, the West, and then ultimately sending them to a place, which, by the way, is an ally that would ultimately be something where if you could argue that doing so might put them at risk, well, there's an international dynamic where that is the case. But either way, the argument is important to make in here that if you're having people vote as a country and don't want that, well, that's what we're supposed to pretend democracy is. But the interesting point is that's not what they exist in. The EU is not this dynamic. And this is why I think it's funny that Elon points at this, even though we know he knows this. It's about trying to make you think something very simplified, in my opinion. But it says Italy's borders will remain open and the new Europeans will be allowed to flood both Italy and Europe and forevermore. Okay. My point is not about whether that is good or bad. It's about whether, first of all, if people in these locations, specifically Italy, are voting for something. Yes, my opinion is then ultimately that's what should happen in a very simplified way. There's a lot more to it. He says this is unacceptable. Do the people of Italy live in a democracy, or does an unelected autocracy make the decisions? See, this is, in my opinion, a very simple manipulation. How about it's neither of those things? But how about when you balance it like this, it is about democracy, good, and what we want, versus what Italy has and it's not. Well, no. That's why that clip we played, democracy is not what we should be aiming for. In fact, that's the trick. But either way, this creates a situation where you got the autocracy allowing illegal immigrants to ruin the country versus democracy, which she's striving for. It's a ploy, in my opinion, very obviously so. And do they live in a democracy? Well, no. Especially not the idea of an unelected, he says, or an unelected autocracy. Well, frankly, we're talking about, I guess you could argue they're elected. I think there's a whole dynamic in this, but we're talking about the EU. So this is not the same as the country's leadership, which I've had a huge gripe with, as most people have for a long time. Basically the circumventing the sovereignty of these countries under the guise of a European Union. In a way, you could make the same argument about states versus the federal government, but that's probably too much for most people to really grasp or really digest with all the things going on in the world right now. But the point is that this is exactly the dynamic that he knows is existing. Instead of simply going, this is what happened. This is, my point is it's basically meant to get you to be upset about the immigration dynamic without basically applying what you see in your country on this country without fully understanding it, unless you're in Italy, and debating it, dividing it between democracy and an unelected autocracy, when the reality is it's the European Union, which is sort of both in a way, but he knows that. I just think it's a very interesting ploy in the way that they're tricking you into thinking things are very similar to the way you see them in your country, when none of them are the way they're highlighting it. All of this, to be frank, is very clearly coming primarily from a weaponized migration dynamic, and not probably who you're thinking of. The reality is undeniably Israel driving some of these things, but so too are these countries and people involved. It's about trying to create the justification to get you to ask for the things that are coming. Now, that's my opinion. But it's obvious that we can see these coming, whether it's about the biometric wall surveillance conversation or the digital ID or the social credit. All of these things are on the tail of this conversation. And that's not even my opinion. It's right. They're telling you that. And so when they come up and they push these ideas and act like somehow that's democracy, even though neither of them what we should want, you're taking the bait, in my opinion. Now, that's not to say that there's not an important point to make about the idea of the illegal immigration that is being used. But if you first and foremost make it about those people, even though most of them, in my opinion, are just random people that are being used, they're not the villain. The villain is the one using those innocent people to make you hate them. But that's on top of the point that there are always dynamics involved with that. But I'll hold off on that to make the next point around the southern border in Israel. But let's not forget this. And here's just the EU point. Hold on. I guess I didn't take the screenshot. But anyway, the point is simply that it's the president of the European Commission is empowered to allocate, where was it? I had it highlighted. The college directs where was it? Only body. Oh, that's what it is. The only commission is the only body that can propose or draft bills and become European laws. So it's interesting that even though I don't agree with it, the dynamic is currently that Italy can vote for something, but it still has to ultimately pass to the EU. So it's, you see my point. It's very easy to frame these things in ways that you don't like, in a way that I can prove to you he knows is not the picture, in order to make you get angry about something that they're trying to channel you into, as opposed to understanding it. Even if you disagree with the way it is, I think they're playing you all in a lot of very obvious ways, like with Venezuela, like with Haiti, like with a lot of these conversations. And I think they're very aware of that. There was one other point, but I don't want to search through it for it right now. That was the main idea, that we're talking about a structure that I think is part of the manipulation, that I think most Europeans, specifically in a lot of these, most Europeans don't want, I think. That's my opinion. But the weaponized migration dynamic is obvious. Here's one of the many shows we've discussed this: tools for subversion, division, and manufacturing consent. And this is not my opinion, guys. You can watch this, and I'll play a clip, just one of the things that I think highlight the general idea. These shouldn't be taken as proof that Israel is behind this or anybody else, but it's very clear that there is, especially as we get into the conversation of these people being picked and they're a dangerous Zionist prophetic mindset, that this is a part of that. So here is what Adam pointed out from No More News about how they're telling you that this conversation, what's happening in Europe and the United States, is what's supposed to happen. It is prophesized, and it will be the end of them. It will be the beginning of the new. So let's at least consider, with all of the alarming things coming out of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu and all of the U.S. supporters we're going to go through, like Mass and the rest that are like rabidly pro-Zionist to a prophetic level. I'll show you today that they might not make this happen. I mean, I'm specifically talking about the Israel conversation. We know this has happened before. Mossad and Israel's intelligence apparatus has been caught doing stuff like this. So please do not out of hand dismiss the possibility, because frankly, I think it's the most obvious thing in this conversation.
End of days, you're going to need the iron of Esav, which represents Edom, which is the West, Europe, and the Americas, to get intermixed with Yishmael, which is basically Arabs and Muslims. How in the world was this ever going to happen if not for this refugee crisis? At the end of days, you're going to have this intermixing between Esav, Edom, which is the West, and the East, which is the Muslims and the Arabs, making this through this influx into the world. They're going to have a far larger birth rate than the indigenous people there, and they're going to sort of conquer by number. And there are many different sources for this, where there will be many, many people killed and so on and so forth. So the idea of having these refugees come into Europe, it's no longer a matter of whether it's right or wrong. It's just simply fulfillment of what it was meant to be all along. This is the fulfillment of the Hazal and the prophecies. This has to happen, and this is just another sign that we are nearing, the completion of this tikkun of the entire world.
But we know one thing, right? That when it comes to the classic Rome, which is Europe, they're finished.
And you don't have to be a prophet or a great analysis for that. You have to open the TV or the internet and see that exactly what was prophesied then, that the sons of Ishmael are going to go and cause havoc around the world. So France is completely barbecued. England is next. Now half of Europe is completely half dead. Now look what's going on in America. So, now in a country near you.
Asking what's going to be with the Goyim when Mashiach comes. Will they be destroyed and annihilated? Someone asked, who cares? Okay. As a nation, they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. Every individual, no survivors. Not only as a nation, they'll cease to exist, even as individuals. In modern terminology, they call it cultural genocide. They'll be annihilated. They basically learn there's going to be cultural genocide. That, you know what, the Goyim as they exist as Goyim, b'fnei atzmam, that's done with. Batul u'mavutul.
Now that's a clip from Adam from No More News. Now here is something that we already highlighted. Now this goes back to January 28th. And the big conversation right here at the time, especially coming from the right of this, the Republican side of the conversation, was that the Hamas was going to be coming through the southern border, which made no sense at all. Anything's possible, but the logistically of a group that, by the way, is funded by Israel, that is in Gaza, just suddenly, it's really what Israel is projecting and what the Azov movement is projecting and what the United States is doing around the world, the government, encroaching on other people's territory, occupying, displacing, while pointing at their enemies who aren't doing that and saying they're doing what you get it. But this is what's interesting. This conversation was very clear, and we talked about it at the time. Suspected terrorist at Texas border turns out to work for Mossad. Now watch the show. There's probably details that I'll forget to, off the top of my head, pull off. But the bottom line was this was a guy who was caught at the southern border. That was this side of it. Saying all these weird things about Palestine and how you'll know who I am soon enough. And of course, the right side of the conversation was like, oh my God, it's Hamas. You see, he said this in Palestine. And of course, then it turned out, no, he wasn't. He was somebody who historically was hired by Mossad, who was, I believe, coming from Jordan. Either way, the point was that once that was clearly pointed out, suddenly we just stopped talking about it. Not me, but people so I guess it's not a problem if a Mossad agent or somebody hired by them is coming through the border and saying dangerous things because, Israel, we're pro-Israel. But anybody else, even if it's unverifiable or in fact false, will hype that forever. This is the problem with the partisan conversation from both sides of it, partisan, all of it. Because this is the same thing you see, the willingness to ignore something that does not align with the agenda. And so my point is, again, you can see how we're being manufactured into this. Like with the Amsterdam conversation we just saw. Blatant, egregious misinformation on the surface. The police can tell you it didn't happen the way they said it did, and yet they'll scream and call you racist and call it a Jewish pogrom while we can see that they were the ones beating people up. Yes, and then they got beat up in return. But to make that about Jewish people is not just dangerous for Jewish people. It is exactly what Zionism is. And this is the problem, right? This is going on. And yet when it becomes clear that it's, at least in this case, who's driving it, it gets dropped. So let's go on the border side of this. Let's point to just the borders are point to the person who got tapped for that. Again, we'll have to wait until the actual confirmation side of this to see who's actually in these positions. But from just this side of it, this says, what do you need to know about Trump's new border czar, Tom Homan? Now, this is an article you can read through. I'm going to include a lot of these for you that if you want to read through and see kind of the mainstream framing of it, that's, but there's some interesting things to read. But for me, it's more about specific points today. Now, this is not as on the front forward as some of the other conversations, but I still thought it was interesting. So here he is on October 7th, 2023, saying, I don't know how many terrorists came across that border and didn't get arrested, but someday we're going to find out, and it's going to be bad day for America. What happened in Israel can happen here, he says. Now, of course, you could argue he's just using that to make a point that'll, motivate or mobilize Americans to act in the way he wants. And, again, I hope the overarching point for all of this is, we should be hoping that he does have interest in Americans or, in American freedom and American safety and whatever else. But I don't think that's what we're seeing from a lot of these things. And so when I pointed this, yeah, sure, maybe he is just using that as a parallel to say we want to protect ourselves. I hope so. But I think what we can see on the surface of a lot of this is that it seems to be almost using these things for the interest of something other than American safety. Now, frankly, this just personal point on this, when you listen to the guy, I don't find him to be that intelligent. And frankly, that's when we're talking about somebody being chosen for a position of power, what we'd like to call leadership, even though these people are rulers, is that ultimately it matters. And it's not a petty point to point out, like with a KJP, that I don't think she's bright. I think she's actually pretty stupid in a lot of ways. And you can make that about her race or her gender. It's not. Just because she's not bright. And I think that matters because obviously we should want the best people in positions that we're talking about. And so if we can listen to them and they're using bad grammar and they're making points that I think are illegitimate or illogical, we should go, maybe we should find somebody better. But see, I think what it's about is loyalists, both for Israel and for Donald Trump, or for the larger agenda of both. And I think that's the problem with a lot of this. And that's why I make the point about KJP. It's the same difference, whatever you think the agenda is. And I don't think it's as simple as, the woke agenda versus Israel, whatever. There's a lot more going on. And frankly, I think they're all in the same thing. But it's interesting to see how often this happens. One side has a different reason. One side has a different agenda. The point is that you get bad people who only care about progressing the agenda versus the truth. And it's everywhere you look. So whether that's this guy or not, you can decide for yourself. But here's one thing. He posted this video where he went to Israel and he's literally talking about the border of Israel. And he goes through this video where he's talking about, look at what they did. Look at their border wall. Here's how we can, and the whole art conversation. And you can see that on, where was it? This clip right here. Where was it? It might have actually just been this one. You can see in the conversation right here. Yes, you can see Israeli border versus the United States border. And so he's having this conversation about how we can emulate Israel. Now, again, maybe he doesn't know the full picture. Maybe he just thinks security. My point is that either way, that's a problem for me. First of all, as he even makes in this conversation, that's a border conversation that just massively failed. And on top of that, remember, we're not talking about the wall anymore. We're talking about a biometric surveillance system that Trump, as I'll play right now, has been very clear about. But either way, it makes me very uncomfortable that we're talking about this praising of a group that is openly committing genocide and talking about how we can emulate what they're doing in an apartheid state. All right. This is my problem for people that cannot we have to be able to recognize the influence as well as even people like this that just want to emulate that. This is an objective problem for what this country is today. And it's no longer something that can be dismissed as racism. It certainly can be. Somebody could just be racist, and that's why they don't want them to exist. But most people can acknowledge Zionism as a problem, acknowledge the apartheid state that it is, acknowledge the egregious human rights violations that happen every single moment in this country, as well as in the occupied territories. Oh, yeah, which all of it, by the way. So I find that to be a problem. Now, here is the clip of the biometric wall. So right now, this is the future of where this goes. I want to make sure you didn't miss this part of it.
Great. We will finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system, which we need desperately. For years, Congress has required biometric entry-exit visa tracking systems, but it has never been completed. The politicians are all talk, no action, never happens.
See how easy it is to get you calling for it? right? Oh, they didn't do it. We're going to do it better. And then he goes, hit Clinton.
Never happens. Hillary Clinton, all talk.
Yeah, right. So we're better than her. We're going to do it. Oh, that was pretty easy, right? Well, I'm going to make a point about that later in the show, how simple it seems to manipulate the current part of the partisanship. But what's frustrating is that this is how it always works. The two-party dynamic, right? So it starts out where they're calling for something different. I forget what it started with not like started with, but like, let's say 2016. I believe the left was ultimately arguing some smaller version of this, but not just more so like nothing, but just maybe some more tracking. But ultimately on the right, it was the wall, right? That was the big difference. We're going to put a physical wall, the big, beautiful wall. And that was the big dividing point. Then it became where both of them started leaning into the middle. All of a sudden, look at that. We're both pointing at a biometric surveillance system while sort of acting like the other one doesn't want the right version of it. Well, guess what? You're all calling for the same thing. And that's how easy it is to using the two-party dynamic to draw you into the middle choice. That's how, like the point they make about the SAVE Act and the mobile driver's license idea. They are always coming together to effectively create the main agenda while giving you the plausible deniability to say, no, it was the left that ultimately did it. No, it was the right. Well, here we are with the biometric tracking system that everybody, especially on the right, would have been screaming about had it come out in Biden's administration or come out during the COVID-19 dynamic. Of course you would have, because we should be concerned about this. The biometric idea of your iris scans, your facial prints, your fingerprint, all of it. The drones and the biometric dynamic or the social credit digital ID overlap that's going to be a part of it. And as he said, it's not just, he says right here.
Unfortunately, when there is action, it's always the wrong decision. Do you ever notice? We'll ensure that this system is in place. And I will tell you, it will be on land, it will be on sea, it will be in air. We will have a proper...
Right. So not just for migration, immigration, then, obviously. Right? I mean, there's no way to deny that. Under the guise that that's necessary, people will fall for it. But the reality is, if that was Hillary Clinton laying it out, you'd all be marching through the street. And rightly so. This is the problem. To realize this is where it's going, and it's about the whole conversation today about getting everybody into driving for the same direction. Now, Max points out Marco Rubio, simply an overlapping point we'll get to in a second before I show you one thing about Marco Rubio that really stands out to me from a Twitter perspective. But he says Marco Rubio partnered with convicted criminal Bob Mendez, the one that got charged with the, under the FARA Act for Egypt, which is just so stupid. I honestly think that was part of some ploy to make, as we're watching Israel blatantly bribe politicians, whether through AIPAC or a number of other things, having this conversation, which probably is still a crime. I mean, I honestly, as far as I remember, and I looked through it for, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. The point was obviously the idea of a foreign government giving a politician money in the interest of things for anything, in my opinion, I find to be a problem. The idea that obviously influences their position. But my point is, if we're going to be objective about it, this is literally what happens every day. Not to say that Bob shouldn't have been charged, but that they all should be, or this is where we are. It's so frustrating how obvious the criminality is, but they selectively pluck out something. You could make the point about Donald Trump, right? The obvious way that these things have been leveled against Trump during this dynamic, which look at how nothing actually happened. I told you, because I think it was all about getting you to think he was the one being attacked. But either way, very clear political manipulation to go after him for things that I think every single one of them are doing. Why would he should have said that? But either way, this is Rubio partnered with Bob Mendez to push for allowing more Venezuelan migrants into the U.S. as the two work to destroy Venezuela's economy. I mean, this is just a different moment, 2022, but just realize how it is a use. They are using this. And then 30 seconds later, talking about the migrant caravan and how it's going to hurt us all. The point is about creating the justification for the next step. Problem, action, solution, or however you want to look at it. And this is constant. Now, quickly, before we go any further, I wanted to point something out that I think is really crazy. And we're going to come back to this in the context of Rubio, which is moments away. But I was looking for every one of them today, whether it's Rubio or all the different names on Twitter to find things that I thought were relevant. And I kept noticing a common thread, specifically for Trump's account or Elon's account, where you'll notice things like this. Where, okay, it says nothing's there, right? See, I'm refreshing it for those in the podcast. Top, latest, nothing. Nothing that says the word Rubio, right? Well, how's that work out? Here's Donald Trump's tweet from 2015. Rubio is totally owned by the lobbyists and the special interests. A lightweight senator with a worst voting record in the Senate. Lazy. Now, the reason I put a question mark on the image today is because it seems Rubio is one of the ones that has yet to be cited by Trump. All of them are up in the air, but that one is more than others. But remember, Israel, everyone seems to be endorsing that as the reality, which is pretty crazy. Either way, my point is about any number of things, right? So you can see the tweet right there. That does exist. It is on Twitter. But ask yourself, how about we just take another group? How about the word totally? This is the search engine for those in the podcast on Twitter. Isn't that interesting? Oh, so I got some with totally, but guess what's not there? Why is that? Now, I am absolutely convinced, if you want my opinion, that this is about trying to manipulate or hide things that they don't want you to see. Now, especially if Rubio becomes the choice, I find that very telling. Now, I bump into this constantly with Elon Musk's account. Again, if you want my opinion, I think it's very obvious these people are gaming the system in order to hide what they don't want you to see. And they're able to because it's Elon. But I mean, look, you show me. You tell me, first of all, why top shows nothing, I think is obvious. That for me, that's the quickest indication there's some kind of a manipulation, that the top category just doesn't exist. The latest is where you find them, but look, there's only two, and I'm showing you, it's right there. So, whoops, I guess it's just a glitch. A glitch that keeps happening in this context and usually around Trump and Elon, but I guess it's just a glitch. I just hope people can recognize what I think that is. Gaming of this system to hide information that they don't want you to see. Pretty interesting. Now, before we go into the rest of the cabinets, which will be the rest of the show, we're starting with Elon and Vivek, which are very alarming points about this, the reality of the Department of Government Efficiency. Again, assuming it all flushes out after 3 months or 2.5, because that matters. And I think a lot of what we're being floated right now is not going to be the case, whether they blame the Senate or something shifts, whatever. I think it's going to change. I really do. That's the sense I get. But I wanted you to see at least a few points about Israel because it's important to recognize maybe those that just haven't seen the rest of the work or have been living under a rock for a year of what Israel is currently doing and how alarming it is that any of these politicians, not just support, like the fact that most of them are so gushing for Israel, for their for the future of the chosen people, for rebuilding the third temple, people that are so alarmingly pro-Israel at the expense of the United States. But just the fact that they'd be willing to say that they support them while they're committing a genocide. Think about how wild that is. So here are some points in case you didn't see, because I'm not going to get into anything else around Israel in the context of foreign policy today. So Kenneth Roth points out yesterday, behind closed doors, and this is a Guardian article, a senior Israeli general has now admitted, which you all know, especially if you're watching this show, that the purpose of forcing Palestinians out of the northern Gaza was to seize the land and never let them return. Another Nakba. That's not just quoted by Kenneth, it's quoted by The Guardian, it's quoted by an actual Israeli general. Why? Because it's what they're doing. Because they are flaunting it. Because they know that the Matt Millers and Patels will pretend like it's not true. And that's and I think it's actually part of something that they're doing on purpose. Demonstrating to the world how they can play the presidency, play the media in the West while publicly pointing to the truth, even though clearly it's to their detriment as they continue to lose influence and lose. But either way, they're openly telling you that this is the point. But if you want to see a group that is displacing, occupying territory, stealing from other countries, you're looking at it, and your government's a part of it. Charles Lister is another doctor, which I added to the long list of apparently 34 doctors now in this thread, and this one breaks my heart. It's like the one we watched before of the doctor who breaks down talking about shredded children that he saw. This is a doctor who wants to tell you, acclaimed British surgeon, by the way, who testifies in UK Parliament, who's detailing how the IDF quadcopters are arriving at the scenes of airstrikes in Gaza and, quote, picking off children, shooting injured children on the ground. And he can't even get the words out because he's breaking down. So for all those that really want to pretend like this is not happening, it's literally everywhere you look and there's no denying it. So every one of these politicians don't care or either, I don't know how they couldn't know, are blinding themselves to it or in fact are okay with it. You can choose.
I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
Please take your time. We're incredibly grateful that you're making...
I mean, I don't know why that impacts me so much, but it's a grown man a doctor who has seen horrifying things in surgery, in war zones, and this man can't even get the words out. He literally breaks down trying to highlight, you know why? Because he watched them assassinate children and he's helpless to stop it. Like all of them are trying to tell you. You know, this is why this kind of thing, I always, even like right now, I'm like, screw everything else. This is what we should be talking about. This is so wild that we all see this happening, and all these ridiculous, feckless politicians are not just supporting it, they're coming out and telling you you should too.
Area, a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
Please take your time. We're incredibly grateful that you're making the time to be here today, and I can only imagine just how it has impacted you and will continue to impact you. And I feel, because you can't unsee what you've seen, but being able to share that with us really helps us hold legislators particularly to account. So we do appreciate the time that you're making for us today. Thank you.
So the drones would come down and pick off civilians, children, and we had description after description. This is not, you know, an occasional thing. This was day after day after day, operating on children who would say, I was lying on the ground after a bomb had dropped, and this quadcopter came down and hovered over me and shot me. And
shot him.
That's clearly a deliberate act, and it was a persistent act, persistent targeting of civilians day after day. We had 1 or 2 mass casualty incidents every day.
Every day. 67 children every day on average.
Crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and...
God, yeah, I just don't know. I mean, it's just so what it can take to make somebody like that break down in the middle of all of these people. God, it just kills me that all of these people are currently supporting all of this. So here's the thread, by the way, that I've added it to. If you want, I mean, this long thread of so far 34 different doctors, all independently telling you the same thing. Slightly different, but the general point being they're committing genocide right in front of them, documented, provable, over and over and over.
When were you in Gaza?
End of April for the first couple of weeks. And then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head. In the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. And they're dead center shots.
In fact, more than 20 doctors recently in Gaza also told Sunday Morning about gunshot wounds to children. One American doctor told us he even reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe that this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. Some shootings have been captured on video.
So, of all the disaster zones you've seen, how does Gaza compare?
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week.
Shredded?
Shredded.
What do you mean?
Missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds.
The UN reports that to date, more than 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced, and the majority of its buildings destroyed. A reality which has taken its own toll on the well-being of children.
What about the emotional wounds?
How can you measure that? I can't measure my own. How do you be an orphan and watching your family, melted in front of you and shredded in front of you? How do you fix that? Ever fix that?
In fact, so many Palestinian children have had family members killed that doctors created a shorthand term, WCNSF, wounded child, no surviving family.
Yeah, if you're someone who can pretend that this is okay for any rationale, you're a disgusting human being, period. Here is what Francesca Albanese pointed out. The horrific reality for people of Gaza since October 7th, 2023, detailed in the report, close to 70% of those killed are women and children. Steadily killed 70% of women and children since the beginning is a genocidal army significantly funded and supported by the Western states. Now here, only three more things I want to show you, or a couple more tabs, but three more main things, then we're going to get into the rest of the cabinets. But I think this is important to lay a table for those that may not have even seen this stuff. So in the context of the food dynamic, here is what's going on. I'm going to go into this at some point, probably the next show, or on the Matt Miller dynamic, Patel, and how they're just so disgustingly gaslighting the obvious nature of the end of the 30-day period, that they said you must do this by then and act like now we're wrong for saying they should do anything about it. Here's what they did.
No, some of you guys don't understand how sadistic this was. Do you see that? That is the aid that they allowed to get into the north yesterday. 10 aid trucks made it into Beit Hanun, and they were sent directly to the school shelter centers. And they were filled with fresh meat, fresh fruit, and fresh vegetables after months of only working with tinned food and spoiled flour. That sounds great, doesn't it? Except immediately after they unloaded all of the trucks, they dropped their evacuation orders. And then immediately after the evacuation orders dropped, they started dropping bombs. The people fled Beit Hanun under a hailstorm of bullets, bombs, and artillery, fired off by helicopter, by tank, and by warplane. Immediately before they started dropping bombs on the schools and the family homes, they gave them one final meal, but they didn't even give them time to eat it. And as the schools burned, Patel told the world that there would be no arms embargo because they let in food. And the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about this at all. They want to tell you what a great job it was that Israel finally let in some food, but they're not going to tell you that they targeted Hassam Shabbat's cousins. Yeah, the journalist for Al Jazeera, they bombed his cousin's family home, and the only survivor was a baby. Dr. Shabbat is laying in two pieces in the street, along with so many other people who were either gunned down or blown to bits. And the Western media wants us to give them a round of applause.
Like the standing ovations for Netanyahu, which we'll get to in a minute. Here's another clip from Max Blumenthal. Here's what Israel did in the Gaza safe area of Mawasi. This was today. The day after Biden announced the weapons will continue flowing despite their obstruction of U.S. aid, which is a verifiable fact. I mean, it has been for the entire time. Now it's been a verifiable fact because the corporate media points to it and everyone acknowledges it for different reasons, but it's always been provable. The thing they keep denying until they tell you it's okay to point at it, but here's how you're supposed to frame it. It's just, there's no words to do it justice based on what we're just looking at. There's just nothing that makes this line up. Right in the middle of all the tent. And you realize that we don't even get the grace of, we don't even get, oh, there's Hamas there. There's tunnels. No, it just doesn't even matter anymore because why? They know, we all know they're lying. They know that Matt Miller and the rest will keep lying for them either way. So just do it. That's what they think. This is why they deserve to be in prison, if not worse. Ryan Grimm points out in regard to the Amsterdam point, which, by the way, here's our show if you want to check this out when we go over this, as well as the one after it. But Ionette points out that the New York Times put a correction out. Now, what's interesting, and if you remember the context, she's one of the videos that was originally catching the Maccabi fans racing through the street, beating up a Dutch person. Not a Jewish, it was a random person that lived there that they chased down and beat up. And that's her video. And they all use that video to claim, here are a bunch of Palestinian supporters beating Jews up in the street. It's like they don't even care. The video clearly did not show that. They don't care because they got marching orders. We need to see that today, just like your politicians got the marching orders. The point is, so she finally, because people like us and Ryan Graham, they've been highlighting that she was calling this out. So guess what? Instead of correcting this, making sure you know what the video actually showed, they just deleted it. Right? Because it's not important that we have the truth out there. It's important that we gaslight for Israel. It says, so the Times realized a video they claim was showing Israelis getting beaten up but it actually showed the opposite. So they removed the video. Why not leave the video in place and just make it accurate? Well, because you don't want to show the reality that you've been lying the entire time. Nothing new. That's how it works. Now here's even Haaretz, the leading Israeli newspaper, saying Mohammed bin Salman, you know, one of the leaders of the authoritarian dictatorship called Saudi Arabia that we pretend is not that, or no one's pretending it's a democracy, mind you, but people will cry out about limited democracies because they don't do exactly what the U.S. says while completely ignoring some of the most the most clear examples of what they claim they're fighting in the world, like Israel, like Saudi Arabia. Quote, Mohammed bin Salman was willing to go a long way toward Israel, but Netanyahu has become unhinged. Can you imagine having Mohammed bin Salman call you unhinged? I hope you can reflect on how terrifying that is when your governments are leading blindly in with Netanyahu and he's not even the most alarming part of this cabinet or current Israeli administration. Mohammed bin Salman says he is unhinged. This needs to wake people up. Now, on that point, I had those tabs mixed up. Make sure you watch the show we went over before. But here's BBC. Saudi Crown Prince says Israel committing genocide in Gaza. Now, genocide is in quote there because, BBC, we all know how for all we know, they're trying to undermine that it is a genocide, even though we all should know that. But I think it's because he's quoting that. Mohammed bin Salman has stated that this is a genocide, which we all know. But just recognize how much they're losing control because they're committing genocide and the world sees it, despite how desperately the Western powers are still lying to you about it. Now, another point to point out, here is what Dan Cohen showed. This is what Israel is funding along with the United States. A delegation from Ukraine's Azov movement visited Israel back in 2023, which, by the way, we talked about, but just recognizing these groups are absolutely the larger dynamic, whether we're talking about Ukraine, whether we're talking about Iraq or Syria, that Israel is driving U.S. policy in such flagrant fashion. It says we were invited to the Knesset, and it's a great honor. You know, the neo-Nazis. And that's why I thought it was important to point out. It's important to understand how the Azov movement fits into the Israeli-U.S. genocide. And there's the link to understand that it's not just the Azov movement. The CIA and Israel have been building this for a long time. The records are going back to the CIA. You can look it up for yourself. So my point in showing you all that is this is a bigger part. It's one part of what's going on in the world today, as well as the fact, as the Apartheid Review points out, the U.S. has squandered $13,440,000 from your pocket to equip Zionist killing machine with the GBU 39-B bombs, while there are still many American citizens searching for leftover food inside bins. People just, that's how they frame it. But people that are struggling in this country. And we're giving $13 billion just for one type of bomb. By the way, which they're using to murder civilians, which we can prove, as well as blocking aid, so they shouldn't get it in the first place. But all that's to say that your government doesn't care about any of it. And realize we can go on for the next 14 hours showing you just what happened in the last hour in Israel and how many crimes they're violating or laws they're violating. So I'm going to start in this conversation in regard to the cabinet choices with the official statement from Trump around the Department of Government Efficiency. Daily Mail writes, Trump names Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to head department, which, by the way, tell me what you think about how I think that's strange. I can't remember a time when you appointed two people to share the leadership of one department. I mean, if I was Elon or Vivek, I would almost find that insulting. So you guys are together, you amount one leadership position. Like that's pretty interesting to me, but I'm sure they'll frame it a different way. But it says the Manhattan Project of our time. I'm like, really? That's what you choose to point to? First of all, I don't even know how this would even remotely overlap with the building of the nuclear bomb. But of course, it's about innovation, I guess. But we're talking about the government efficiency. By the way, all of the MAGA movement believes is going to be somehow reducing government, which I hope, but I find that really hard to believe when you can see what they're doing. And overlapping that with the Manhattan Project, and that's supposed to be synonymous with restricting or removing government or making it more efficient. Really? I mean, I don't even know where they thought they were going with that analogy, but it's pretty crazy. That's not even to get into a lot of different alarming aspects of what the Manhattan Project were for another conversation. But it says Trump made the bombshell announcement Tuesday night saying Musk will co-lead the Manhattan Project of our time, he says, with the former Republican president candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Co-lead. I find that pretty strange. Republicans have long complained about government overspending. Really? And Trump touted the Doge will accomplish its goals by July 4th, 2026. Okay. I'd love to hear what people think the goals are of what this will be. My point would be that whatever he says he accomplishes, what you'll all tout. Just like with Trump's or with past presidential things they claim they've done. Anybody objective can see both sides lying about everything they've done as far back as you can look. Either way, I don't believe we're going to see government efficiency. I think we're going to see them using, under the guise of that, the restructuring of where we're going, right? Like point, for example, saying, okay, we're going to get rid of the Fed, or really, and whether they actually do that or the same structure just takes over the CBDC dynamic. The point is, that's how I see this going. I hope I'm wrong. The bottom line is they're telling you this stuff is happening. So now that they're ready to transition into the new style, this will be, I think, be framed as the, removing these bad things, when in reality, right behind it is the worst thing. But either way, the idea of reducing government is something I think most people can agree with, which is why I think they're kind of leaning into that right now. But yeah, if it happens the way that you think it does, that's a positive, and we should all support it. Trump pledged that the pair would help him dismantle government bureaucracy and slash excess regulations, cut wasteful spending, and restructure federal agencies. Restructure is not the same as getting rid of, but either way, slash excess regulations. Now, what's interesting about that? So my thing is that in a general sense, really, if we could do it in somehow a broad stroke, that we shouldn't want any of these government dynamics. Get rid of the state entirely. But what's interesting is when we still have that state, when they're talking about removing regulations, think about how interestingly contradictory this would be. So we have a situation where our government and all of the agencies they claim, or rather agencies that claim they're holding it to account, companies or the EPA, for example, with all the things that are killing us around the world, and you're going to remove regulations, you're going to reduce the things that they're supposed to be. That's the opposite of what we're talking about. Well, I hope you understand the difference, because the idea is that you're still allowing the state to control your life, but then removing the concept of, the idea, for example, to make it specific, with the EPA and things like dioxins we're talking about, or any number of other dangerous things, or the vaccines for that matter. These are things that are already dangerous, that we've known for a very long time, or fluoride in your water. The idea of removing regulations, which I believe they're pointing to, is about allowing business to continue to ignore the things that they have in place to keep you safe. It's an interesting overlap. Again, I hope it's in the context of things that would make it easier for Americans to take choices without having to go through all the stupid red tape and hoops, but I don't think that's what it will be. In fact, I think it will be far more of that, just in another way. But I don't know why, in this position, people would assume that they're going to do the right thing. Based on their actions, based on who they are and what they represent, which we'll go through next, the obvious thing to do is to recognize that they would take you in a direction that is in the interest of the government versus you. Now, obviously, I know why Trump supporters want to believe the opposite. It's clear that they're saying the opposite. But if we have any understanding of history or politics, or even what these two people represent, we would be very worried while hoping for the best. But that's not what I'm seeing in most cases. So here is Trump's statement about both of them, just so you can see that on Truth Social. So that is, he's posted that. So that does amount to this position. Here's what David Icke said. Trump gives Peter Thiel's AI mate, Musk, and Thiel's business associate, Ramaswamy, new job in government running the Manhattan Project of our time to, quote, dismantle Washington's bureaucracy and waste, dismantling regulation to facilitate the AI human fusion agenda, and much else besides. That's what I'm talking about. Right? So obviously there are clear points to be made in a liberty direction. Like, I guess the point he's making, for example, is, again, to make it's such an abstract topic, but to make it specific so it's easy to understand. If you're allowing the state to continue to do these things while removing their restrictions, all you're doing is allowing them to do whatever they want without anything, which, by the way, they could ignore it anyway, but that gives you some kind of legal repercussion. as opposed to just removing the state and the idea of restrictions on you. Now, there's an overlap, obviously, but I agree with how he thinks this is working. Dismantling regulation to facilitate the change they're going to roll out, which there would be a lot of roadblocks if they didn't have the things I think they're going to remove. Again, this is all hypothetical. But if we understand, which we'll go through right now, Ramaswamy's connection to the biopharmaceutical direction or Elon Musk's connection to the technocratic direction, these things should be very concerning. Right? We want to pretend it's, trust but verify, whatever you want to align it with. This is obviously how an objective person, an intelligent person would engage with this, whether or not they promise the world. That's not what I'm seeing. Now, first is this point that I think is pretty alarming. The obvious overlap of Ramaswamy with everything, which this is new to me. Now, I'm aware of the company's overlap, but the lawsuit, I want conservatives out there to recognize why this is a problem, in conjunction with Donald Trump's continued support of this exact thing. Now, Crypto No Conspiracy News points out United States District Court for the District of Delaware. This is a lawsuit from Ramaswamy's company against Moderna. You know what? Or you know what for? You know why? Specifically the lipid nanoparticle technology. The thing that has been very, very, very damaging that they're still using to make new shots that I think we've all highlighted as a problem. Vivek Ramaswamy was board chairman of Roviant Sciences up to a year after the lawsuit. And it says, for the patented delivery method of the nanotechnology and the COVID vaccines was filed. And this says Vivek is suing Pfizer and Moderna, and you can read it in the lawsuit, for stealing the delivery method patent of the nanotechnology and the COVID vaccines from him. Now, we've talked about this exact thing a lot. It's interesting how little attention this gets around the earlier conversations, like right in the beginning of this, where Moderna, remember Bob Langer is the scientific co-founder of Moderna. And these are central points in all of this we've gone over. Here's Bob himself, the coronavirus common denominator who is tied to Charles Lieber. So the point is that there is an obvious overlap that goes right to the central core part of Trump's administration that is directly tapped into everything that is COVID-19, the worst and most damaging parts of it, as well as a lot of other people, which we'll get to. But here's the actual thing. In the introduction itself, it says the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and this is in the lawsuit itself. And this is, so his company, Arbutus Biopharma Corporation, is saying the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact of it, one of the greatest public health challenges in modern history. See, even the idea that I can promise you that most people supporting Trump do not agree with 99% of what's in here. And Vivek Ramaswamy is a very central part, at least publicly, of what the Trump circle is doing. And it says would be immeasurably worse, but for the rapid, widespread availability of cutting-edge mRNA-based vaccines like Moderna's. Is that what you think? Anybody? I mean, literally, who in the world still thinks this is not? Oh, this is from. Of course, I forget. There's usually not dates around this, but the point is, this is not from years ago, right? This is a current dynamic, and it says Moderna brought its vaccine from lab bench to arms in record speed. That unprecedented accomplishment was made possible by Moderna's use of breakthrough technology Arbutus had already created and patented. Now, there's dispute about that all over the place. And I think there's even another aspect of this where the point is that ultimately they're all using the same lipid nanoparticle concentration, where you're talking about the mod RNA dynamic within that. And both of these things are playing a central part in why this thing is so wildly dangerous. And realize this goes back to Charles Lieber. This goes back to his work at Harvard and the overlapping work with Bob Langer. And all of these things are terrifying in obvious ways. And that's not even to get into where it's going and what they're doing it for, but the actual specific lipid nanoparticle itself. I'll just cut to this real quick. We've talked about this so many different times. The mRNA lipid nanoparticle platform's lipid nanoparticle component is highly inflammatory. Now, we've talked about this is from peer-reviewed study from iScience. Remember the point we make a lot around this, that the conversation is simply that before COVID-19, one of the arguments was that they could increase the concentration of the lipid nanoparticles, and ultimately it would become too dangerous. But they needed to do that in order to make sure that the mod RNA reached the point it needed to get to simplify it. And that was one of the earlier problems, that we couldn't, the more we increase it to make it get there, people got too sick. And I keep pointing this out. Then we jump into the COVID-19 land, and guess what? The way they solved it is by increasing the lipid nanoparticle concentration. Okay. well, why didn't we have the same problems? Crickets. Guess what? We did. It's obvious. You all see it. So did they just decide to do the same thing without concern for the fact they knew it would hurt people, or was there something else going on? Either way, it's bad and dangerous and harmful. And the whole thing is about something much darker than just giving you an injection. It says, and this is, he says, a revolutionary lipid nanoparticle delivery platform. That's exactly what we're talking about. That took the scientists of Arbutus years and painstaking work to develop and refine. Moderna, as well as is well aware of Arbutus's lipid nanoparticle patents and licensed them for another product, but it chose not to do so for COVID-19 vaccine. Now, does that make sense? There's something different going on in all of this. And I think at the end of the day, we're talking about Moderna, which is specifically Bob Langer's company, or he's the scientific co-founder, which is directly tied in with the central government. I'm talking like DARPA, military, all of this. So the overlap, we had a great interview with Destiny was it Revendez? I forget the last name all of a sudden. But she was really talking about the important overlap of the military, the medical countermeasure dynamic, and how there's so many angles. It's so crazy how many different things were brought up and highlighted around how criminal the whole thing was. And I'm just saying that because as I'm getting into it, my mind's trying to pull me back in. There's so many things to talk about. Either way, that the crux of the point is that we know this is dangerous. We know that we've been played. And the fact that they're now in with people like Thiel and Musk and Vivek and others that overlap with this, that are in the core part of his administration, as well as Trump still supporting this. I guess the main point is how you can pretend like that's okay. At the very least, if you think it's one small part of a larger problem, why isn't anybody calling it out? Now it says instead, it attempted to invalidate several of the patents before the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I think I'll leave it there just for time since we have a lot to get to, but you read through this. I'll jump down really quickly to one part of this that I thought was interesting, nature of the action. It says this is a civil action under the patent laws of the United States, or was that the one? Again, just the mRNA 1273 COVID vaccine specifically, which is one of them, I frankly think the Pfizer, based on the data, is far more dangerous for plenty of reasons, but either way. Yeah, I'll leave it there just for time, but there's a lot to get into in this that I think is important, so it's worth reading through. Generally speaking, all of them continue to support this, and they're even fighting in court to be the one responsible for it. Think about how completely counterintuitive that is. Now, I'll include these articles or the shows we did back in 2023. Study, and it's a peer-reviewed study, still stands. Study finds the mRNA platform itself, which that includes the lipid nanoparticle platform, is what's driving myocarditis. This one, the deadly lipid nanoparticle spike protein design. But this specifically focuses on why that's dangerous. This was in 2023 in May. Here's the peer-reviewed study showing you that what they're talking about is inflammatory, and you get into why. Inflammation is one of the central reasons for a lot of our problems, and it is dangerous, guys. Now, this is from 2024, from April. Arbutus, Genevant gain an edge in COVID patent scrap with Moderna. Now, it says they both, in a joint company between Arbutus and Rovant that holds a license to the patents in the suit, first asserted the patents back in 2022. The two argue that Moderna used their revolutionary lipid nanoparticle delivery platform without payment or license, according to the tweet. Just to reiterate in this article that this is what they're debating over. And it says the companies are seeking compensation for the alleged use of their patented technology that was developed, quote, with great effort and at great expense, and without which Moderna's COVID vaccine would not have been successful. Imagine stepping in and trying to take credit for what we all see as one of the most deadly things we've ever been forced to take. And it goes on to say, Moderna, meanwhile, believes that its Spikevax technology, including our proprietary lipid nanoparticle delivery system, is the result of our independent research and development. And a company spokesman noted in an email. So debating on who has the right to it. Now, here you can see in this older, now that I can't get to load anywhere else, this is from 2023, Pfizer accused of COVID-19 patent. So the point to make is that it clearly is both of them, which is interesting that they're only focusing on one, but the different lawsuits. The point is that all of them, or at least the platform ones, were using their lipid nanoparticles, or at least they claim is theirs. Vivek Ramaswamy, you can see his name right there, is connected to both. The feat wouldn't have been possible without their technology. Seeking damages for alleged infringement of these patents. Now, we'll include the article here. What is the difference between mRNA and mod RNA? And that's important to understand in the conversation of what they're also highlighting, the overlap for what they're using it for. And I'll include both these articles. Bob Langer, the coronavirus common denominator, ties to Charles Lieber, and the Charles Lieber connection from nanotechnology to COVID-19 to technocracy. Now, one of the people we're going to skip over, since we briefly talked about it in the other show, is somebody like Susie Wiles, who I'm pointing to it now because of the obvious overlap with the pharmaceutical side of this. If you don't remember, she became the co-chair of lobbying firm Mercury Public Affairs in February 2022. Their clientele includes Pfizer, Gavi Vaccine Alliance, which spearheaded vaccine funding and distribution COVID-19 efforts during the COVID-19 situation. Now, it says a role also played by the United Nations Foundation, which is overlaps in other parts of this. But the point showing you these people are all central in this, guys. This is not what you would expect. Now, on the Elon Musk side of it, I think her points are worthy. There are points to be made here about kind of the absurdity of somebody like him in this position. Now, he says, either we get government efficient or America goes bankrupt. Well, funny enough, it's like I would agree in a general sense. But you realize, I'm pretty sure that if we're $30 trillion in debt, that it's not going to go bankrupt through one more administration. Or, maybe not, since maybe their rubber band is about to snap. My point is not to say that we shouldn't care. Obviously, we should. But my point is that it's interesting that suddenly they want to point to that. Or Elon Musk, because I know you guys don't want to pretend, or you want to pretend he's not part of the same structure, the same system. But now we're pointing to the same thing we've always seen. This has to change, or we're going to go bankrupt. Or if you don't do this, your free speech will be gone tomorrow. Neither of which I think is fully the picture. They will continue to put more debt. They'll continue to go forward until they transition you into the new phase of where this goes. And I think that's why he's pointing to it. He goes, that's where it comes down to. Wish I were wrong, but it's true. And he says, our defense budget is gigantic. It's $1 trillion. Well, yes, I've been saying that for how long? Getting pushback from both sides of the paradigm. It is well over. The military budget is well over that much. It's crazy. When you overlap it with specifically the black budget, the many different things that they allot that don't claim our military, which clearly are. The interest we owe on the debt is now higher than a defense budget. This is not sustainable. Yeah, it's been like that for a long time, guys. My point is, yes, this is a problem, but this is what we should be worried about. That somebody steps in and points to something we've all been pointing to and suddenly has a solution for it. We should be very worried about what that solution is. It's like anything else we've talked about, where suddenly they step in and use the problem to justify, to get you to react in order to drive you into the next step. Now, yes, if this changes in a good way, well, yes, I will be the first to praise it. And I hope you're right. But if we're not able to consider that it also might be another, maybe you should reflect on why you're so unwilling to ask whether he could be lying to you. Or maybe he's just wrong. Or maybe he's being played. My point is, as always, to see how anything could but that's not about why or how. It's about the fact that we should consider that it's possible that it could go the other direction. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are not just unwilling to, but almost as if they can't wrap their mind around that. That we know for sure this will be better. Well, no, you don't. You don't know that for sure. You hope based on the promises of oligarchs and billionaires and technocrats and Zionists. Now, he says all actions of the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, here's my point. This is just something he said out loud. He posted on Twitter. If you want to base that off the Twitter files or whatever else that you relate to him, well, that's about 50-50. My point is that we don't know just because he says it that it will, even if he may mean it and change his mind later, or it could be lying, or maybe Trump will stop him. But he says all actions of this new efficiency post, which, by the way, I forgot to ask, what do you guys think? Is he part of the government now? Yes, is the point. Is he an official, is he an advisor in all this? Either way, the point is you are now part of a government administration, and that will, without question, change the way, you're online screaming about overthrowing Venezuela. Well, that makes a huge difference now. And the reality is free speech matters, obviously, no matter what. But it's interesting to see how this has been played in reverse. Like we talked about the Chinese entities that were speaking up about something they didn't like, and they called that clearly you can see that this will overlap with things that they've criticized. And I guarantee you he will keep doing the same thing. It's my opinion, obviously, but pretty certain that he will see the same because it's, anyway, we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But I think at the end of the day, him being a part of the government is going to be very interesting to see how it changes the interactions. But he says they'll be posted online for maximum transparency. All actions. Now, how long do you think until that doesn't? Let's just say it starts. How long until you think that we find something that wasn't posted? I mean, are we really going to pretend that they'll just, like, if something goes awry, that they're going to post it? No, these people are the government, guys. That just because you like what's happening, they're still, this is the U.S. government. So if you're going to base it on actions, past record, the obvious point is this is probably not even going to happen. And if it does, they're going to show you what you want, that we want you to see. Anytime the public thinks we're cutting something important or not, just let us know. Okay, well, how's that work? Right? Are you going to take into account everyone's opinion? Well, no. So it's obviously the same way that they let you line up and speak in front of Congress and say, we don't want this or we want that. And then they do the same thing they're going to do anyway. Whether that's a state level idea about a vaccine that you want to stop and literally everybody says we don't want it, and they vote for it anyway, or a school board dynamic, the idea of pretending that just because they have an online forum that suddenly that they're going to care what you think. Yes, I'm a pessimist when it comes to government. I think we have every right to be. History shows us that. I think it's much more honest to engage with what we can prove they've done, whether him or anybody else in the government, as opposed to blindly hoping or believing that we will do the right thing by us. It says we also have a leaderboard for the most insanely dumb spending of your tax dollars. Now, where this goes is what we'll have to wait for. But I think what's interesting is the impact on this will have on governments around the world cannot be overstated. That kind of thing. You mean the thing that we don't even know what it will look like and what it will be and whether he's honest about it or whether it'll even happen? But Elon said, so let's all start cheering about it. And he says the entertainment value will be epic. Come on, guys. We need to start paying attention to how obvious the entertainment value. What about this? The Department of Government Efficiency, the merch will be fire. I mean, again, it feels like we're being trolled, quite frankly. We'll see how it plays out, but I think the obvious point in this is this seems like a child excited about some toy. And on top of that, why in the world we think Elon Musk has the background or any history showing that he has any insight on how to reduce government spending? The reality is his track record shows you quite the opposite. Now, before we get to that, what do you think is efficient? Right? So he's out there saying, we're going to do something that's efficient. We're going to make sure the government's efficient. Well, by the way, that pretty much sounds to me like more government. And I know you love to pretend that means less government because that's what they like abstractly suggested and you all assume was going to be the case. like a finger pointing to a meme and you all break it down as if we know the future. But either way, do you agree with solar energy? I mean, obviously there's use for it, but the reality of what it is today, what it's accomplishing and what it could do is we're being lied to aggressively. But my point is obviously, whether it's if it's not forced, these are things that you can choose to do that I think have value. But I think what's clear is that the Republican side of the conversation has been very, very outspoken about why this is not the right step. And yet here's Elon Musk on the 12th, yesterday, saying solar power will be the vast majority of our power generation in the future. Do you agree with that? Do you want that? Is that more efficient to you? And this person says false and also dumb. You're better than this. Well, okay. The point is not whether it is, it's about whether you think that. And if this is supposed to be representing what you guys want and not, driving in the Great Reset and from a different angle, ask yourself if this makes sense. Here he is and somebody else commenting saying, is there anything Elon won't revolutionize? This is so nuts. God, it just makes me embarrassed for this person, this pandering like it's some, you like Taylor Swift concert. The point is clearly that we don't know what the hell this means. We don't know what it's going to do. And most Republicans actually don't agree with this. Here's Cat Turd saying, with 8% inflation and gas at $5 a gallon, the last thing Americans want to hear is the Democrats' ridiculous windmill solar fairy tale BS. Okay, is it okay if Elon does it? Let's get a countdown running until Cat Turd starts screaming the praise about solar energy because Elon said so, or because his version will be better, and maybe it will be. But we don't know that. The reality of the technology is clear, and Elon Musk is not going to. The question is whether he revolutionizes, quite frankly, anything. But the point is that this does not seem to be aligning with Republicans' mindset. Joe Biden is about as useless as solar and wind energy, he continues to say. Well, here's Tucker Carlson, interview from 9 months ago. Solar power is a scam, he says. Huh, okay, that's interesting. What does he think now? Is Elon, they're going to start high-fiving about solar energy? Here he is again from 9 months ago. Different show. They lied to you about solar power. Here he is on Fox News. Solar power is not a replacement for fossil fuels. Well, that's the opposite of what Elon Musk is saying. And by the way, has consistently been saying that for a long time. I mean, and just because he says that, maybe Trump and Vance and them disagree. And that's okay. My point is not to say that it's wrong that they disagree. It's that we're being presented with something quite different than what we are being told or what you think is happening. Now here is just quickly to show you again that Elon Musk is completely checking every box when it comes to the Great Reset, and whether it's the digital ID, whether it's the robots, whether it is every aspect of this, from vaccines to carbon tax, is something that he has publicly supported. But as long as it's Elon saying it, you'll rationalize why it makes sense for Republicans, team sports style. I think most conservatives are calling this out.
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
Are you vaccinated, if I
Yes.
may ask?
Yeah. I mean, I'm very, very pro-vaccination. I believe the science is unequivocal.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here?
So what's interesting is unequivocal means something, right? And you could argue he didn't see all the evidence and suddenly saw new evidence, but that would be pretty crazy to think about. That was not that long ago. So I just want you to think about the shifting dynamic of whether it's Trump or Elon or, or Vance, and like everybody in his cabinet that 30 seconds ago said he was a grifting maniac liar. Now suddenly he's the best president in the world. It's all politics for you.
We have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants. Just think of sensors planted into our brains.
Basically implanted in your skull. So, but it would be flush with your skull. So you basically take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there. You'd put the electrode, you'd insert the electrode threads very carefully into the brain.
It doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you if you take a genetic editing. It's a fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological world. That's really the essence of the fourth industrial revolution.
A merger with biological intelligence and machine intelligence.
An effort for man to merge with machine in a healthy way.
Yes.
To beat machines, you basically have to merge with machines.
Most likely, yes.
As work is changing, is a universal basic income really a solution to this problem?
I think ultimately we will have to have some kind of universal basic income. And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary.
Decarbonization of the economy.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
I mean, my top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax.
This global reset is necessary.
Can you imagine if any of those were Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris talking about merging humans with machines? I don't even need to finish the point. I mean, what's crazy is it's like people, you already know. I think we're dealing with people that are choosing not to acknowledge how alarming the overlaps are, by and large. But here's another point that I think is very, very important to point out. So it's sort of like Donald Trump, for example. Not all of us have the luxury of being bailed out by other billionaires, right? Where ultimately you can be a success if you're able to fail over and over again with lots of money until you ultimately succeed, which is the reality. Donald Trump declared bankruptcy many, many, many times until the last main one, ultimately, when he got bailed out by other very wealthy billionaire families. Rothschilds, which one was it now off the top of my head? Rockefellers or I think it was the Rothschilds. Either way, the point is, clearly the statement was from the banker entities through all of that he was worth more as an entity. So they decided to keep him around. Now, there's no question about that being bought off and influenced at that point, but how much and what degree? And there's obvious Israeli overlap there. The point for this is that this is from 2023. Elon Musk breaks world record for largest loss of personal fortune in history. Now, don't forget, right now, he is the richest person on the planet. And I'll show you that over. It's actually really quickly from right here. He became so wealthy. This is from November 11th. That the gap between him and Jeff Bezos, the second richest person in the world, is equivalent to the GDP of Luxembourg. God, that's just grotesque. The richest person in the world. He's the outsider rebel that's going to change the planet. I certainly hope so. I just found this to be really hard to wrap my mind around. The point, though, is that in this point, before Donald Trump, before all this, and really the post-Donald Trump timeframe right now is what has kind of rapidly changed all this. So in January 2023, because of the Tesla share price that went down, He lost $182 billion. So my point is the average person doesn't get that luxury. Whether SpaceX repeatedly fails or Tesla cars crash every 30 seconds, the point is that you ultimately get bought into. And if you were Joe in the corner, your company fails, you don't get to just ask for $1 billion to bail you out. My point is the reason you can be pointed to as an innovator and a success is because you failed and failed and failed and eventually got to succeed because you got to try 40 times in a row with lots and lots of money. It's not as simple as that. I'm not saying that's his story. I'm saying that is the point I'm making about that position. But yes, you can see that when it comes to him and Trump in different dynamics. That a lot of these things didn't go the way they thought it would. And if you were running Tesla with your one business and cars were crashing every day, you probably wouldn't be here right now. My point is to show you that this is the guy going to be running government efficiency. Now, is it efficient to keep wasting money until you eventually get what you want? Not really. And this is from November 8th, 2024. Elon Musk's net worth rockets to over $300 billion as Trump win fuels optimism for Tesla and SpaceX. Funny how that works, right? You attach to that star, and all of a sudden, here's the main point. He gained $70 billion just since Trump's victory. Now, is that because you're succeeding or because you're just, you get the point, guys. Now, you can decide for yourself whether you think there's more going on there, whether he's the smartest person in the world, as people love to claim, which I think is, I'm not saying he's stupid. I think it's more of a construct, quite frankly. But to me, I find that to be pretty embarrassing. We're talking about this person as the government efficiency ambassador or whatever you're going to be calling it. And on another note, I find interesting. Now, this obviously could just be partisan stuff, which, that's kind of what I get the sense from, to be honest, because I don't know how we would really know the insights. But there's a conversation going around, actually both of them. From one side of it, you're hearing the idea that Elon is just part of the family now. He's part of Trump's family. But the other side of it, there are people saying things like this, saying Trump's team is already sick of Elon Musk and sort of arguing he's overstaying his welcome and he's all popping up in places he shouldn't be and kind of leaning into phone calls that he shouldn't be a part of, like major, apparently in a call to Ukraine. He's suddenly in there as what? That's a weird thing to see. It shows you the kind of worry for people like us, whether or not he was getting a position, to show you the influence and the power of these people right now. It's like a little club. That's weird. Hey, you're not in it. But my point is not to take this at face value, because obviously this could be something being thrown out there to undermine what people don't like or they're jealous of. Either way, the point to me that stands out was the point about Trump and what we do know about his past. The point they make in this is about Bannon, for example, where you get these people that kind of shoot up and all of a sudden they're like rising stars next to Trump, like Bannon or like any number of them, Pompeo or Bill Barr. And all of a sudden they're this huge thing and they're like the icon of the right until suddenly they're not. Until suddenly, either because they have an argument and Trump now calls him the worst person ever, now he's the bad guy, right? All of it. One by one, all these last people became the enemies. So it's interesting to argue that obviously they're both, at least the article, they call them narcissists. I think that's pretty obvious. And so what happens when suddenly Elon Musk is taking more of the stage than Trump? I think we've seen how that works out. Suddenly, the ego gets in the way. I kind of sense that's where this probably goes. But you guys can decide for yourself. We'll have to wait and see. Now, Decentered News put out a great clip about Weinstein. Whitney Webb says, I have particular disdain. Agorist Nexus says, we should make a list of all the libertarians who backed or endorsed Trump so the people know who was on the wrong side of history. I agree with that. She says, I have a particular disdain for the people who during the campaign tried to sell Bilderberg steering committee member Peter Thiel as our elites. Give me an effing break. Here is Weinstein saying that. That's where it comes from. And first of all, we're talking about elitists. Calling them elites is saying that they're better than you. They're elitists. They believe they're better than you. But this is so childlike, like this childlike world we live in where we can believe, of course, hope. We can always hope for people to be what they don't appear to be, better in a way, better, in the positive sense. But this is just this idea that we act like they're on our side because we want them to, because they say pretty things. Have we not learned anything, or are these people also a part of getting you to lie, to adhere to this mindset?
Anticipate that they were going to create an alternative to the media that they controlled.
Let's just start with how stupid that is. Long David Icke's been talking about this. Yes, they did. They very much so recognized that what they were doing was creating. That's why they created what he's pointing to as. So right now, what he's kind of alluding to is the mainstream alternative media. not what the independent media, but as if the mainstream alternative media was the reaction to corporate media. Oh, yeah, sorry, you missed about 15 years in there where people like us were building the, I shouldn't even say, there's plenty of people before me that were building this, for a long time. But I'm talking about not the entirety origin of the independent media, but like since the rise of when this started becoming, honestly, I think I kind of came at the early part of when that was starting. Because there's people like, the Free Thought Project and Anti-Media were groups that were doing this so long ago. I can go back to people like Bill Hicks for that matter. But my point is that to make it about them and they didn't expect that. Come on. Does anybody actually believe that? Like they just accidentally did this and felt, it just seems like childishly stupid. Like you're going to pretend that they wouldn't foresee people responding to their controlled media? Obviously. But you see, I think they represent what is supposed to be what you see as the response to that. They are the controlled media. And that's my opinion, obviously.
Anticipate that they were going to create an alternative to the media that they controlled. That's how little they understand. They created a rebellion. There's now a very influential, if not powerful, group of people across a wide spectrum discussing what those elites are up to, right? We even, I think, have elites of our own. I can't be certain, but Musk doesn't look like he's on their team to me.
Except for literally every box. But he says something else, so I'd agree. I think he says good things, so let's pretend. Again, I hope so. Like, look, the point again is to come to the thing that people push back on. Of course I would want that to be the case, whether I like Elon Musk or not. If he is genuinely trying to buck the larger system and genuinely trying to reduce the government and give us more freedom, but we can prove that's not true. You can look at his actions with Israel, the suppression on the platform. It's, again, do you think he doesn't see those things? Obviously he does. So he's either making a very compromised decision to say that even though all of these things point to the opposite, I just want to believe that he is. Then say it like that. The information on the table shockingly shows the opposite. But even then, I can still stand back and say, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe he does. Maybe he has to do those things to convince them, to trick it. But I'm not going to blindly go align with that until I see the actions that truly align with more freedom, that truly align with not censoring people, sort of like not censoring people on Twitter like he is right now. Sad.
He's not on their team.
That's what I think. Musk?
Oh, sorry. And then Joe Rogan responds by saying he's not on their team. Because we know, right? We know.
To me.
He's not on their team.
That's what I think.
He's...
the oligarch billionaire Zionist technocrat who's literally a contractor for the military in 4 different ways. Who's running a platform that they bought from the deep state, apparently, but they let that happen, who's now suddenly like the most richest person in the world, the most rich person in the world is lined up next to a power. Yeah, it all sounds completely like he's bucking the system, doesn't it?
Insanely wealthy and independent and an actual legitimate genius. Not flawless.
See, you know what I mean? Why do we say things like that? Certainly there's reason to think that. But I have not seen anything other than the way he presents himself to make that case. And I'm not saying that because I'm not trying to attack him. I'm just trying to be objective. We don't know these things the way they present them. And frankly, I see examples that show the opposite. But for you to decide.
Not flawless.
He gets out of line every now and then. He gets a little wacky.
He does.
But he's fun.
He's restless.
He's a fun guy to have at the helm.
And I think he looks at what is being plotted against us and sees it as a fun challenge to confront it. So that,
and he has the resources to do it, unlike most people, and has the courage.
It's not even, I'm sure you get the sense. It's hard to act like this is not worthy of ridicule. But here's what Free Print says. The so-called red-pilled right, the ones who claim to see beyond the lies, are incapable of looking deeper than the first layer they're handed. Now, I want to be clear that from my perspective, I'm not saying this or reading this at the Republicans, or rather, the conservatives in general. This for me is, as I've said before, the idea of the two-party, the team sport politics, which I'm of the mind is a diminishing dynamic. But they still have the capture on like the two-party, like the idea that you need to still vote or still pick one of the two choices like that. So I see a lot of people, liberals and conservatives, that are beginning to challenge and see a lot of this stuff, but are still kind of ideologically trapped in that dynamic. So the point is, they don't need you to truly believe in it. They just need you to comply. That's why we're trying to say that, and we'll do it again the next selection and try to hope we can get through. But the point in my mind, when he talked about the red-pilled right, is the Republicans of it all. And in some, it overlaps for sure. But these are the people that are the ones that I keep pointing out when we get in these conversations that just know for sure. And he says that they are the ones that claim to see beyond it. I guess you could argue more so than the left, but are incapable of looking deeper than the lay they're handed. This is like saying because the media said it, the opposite is true, right? It's so obvious to me how anybody with just basic discernment can say, okay, well, maybe they did that, so I would make that choice. But nope, a lot of them don't. I think it's a self-serving kind of thing. But it says they say they're anti-establishment, awake to the fake news, and see conspiracies where others don't, but they're only lifted the surface, the layer designed for them to find. Again, that's kind of the point I keep making about how they see that we're questioning stuff, so they take it one step further. We got to start thinking like that. And it says they're told that Trump is their anti-establishment savior, and they accept it without question, as if one man alone could dismantle a system so vast and entrenched. They believe they're rejecting the official story, but they're following a script all the same, a script that's been crafted to pacify them with a simple hero, an easy enemy, and a neatly packaged narrative. They don't dig deep enough to find out that their side is as corrupt as the counterpart because they don't want to. It's easier to believe in a savior than to confront the deeper, uglier truths about control and manipulation, even within their own camp. Right? That I'm going to add, because that creates a system or a dynamic where you're looking inward. You're going to have to self-criticize, and most people don't want to do that, especially in politics. But it says they say they see their puppet strings, but they're right when they're supposed. But they're right where they're supposed to be, playing the role assigned to them. Be better. Our freedom depends on it. It's very well said. Now here's Clint Russell. Vivek and Elon are two of the smartest people in the country. To task them with dismantling government agencies might be the most innovative libertarian idea I've ever seen put into action, aside from founding our country. A revolution of firings with no gunpowder. Historic. Wow. I didn't realize we'd done all that already. I thought we haven't even got people in position yet, and this is historic already. Why? Because of what they said. Because of what they floated is going to happen, maybe. That's shocking, because I've had interviews in the past where, I just don't get it. I don't get this kind of teenage hero worship where we're talking about people that we don't know for sure. They could be lying. They could be wrong. They could change their mind. The idea that we know this is even going to happen, we're not even there yet. We haven't even seen it begin. And this is the kind, I just don't understand that. Frankly, I find it to be, either way, the point is that is not how we should be doing. We should be engaging with what we can prove so far. Whether or not you think they're the smartest people in the world that will change everything, the point is that we don't know if they're going to dismantle anything. We don't know it's going to be innovative or libertarian because we haven't gotten there yet. And frankly, to pretend that any of them are even partial, like everything they do and who they are is the opposite. It's the antithesis of libertarian or any kind of under that umbrella mindset. It's like Thiel and his fake prosperity. It's not what they pretend. They are playing people who are libertarians. And in many cases, getting other libertarians to profess to everybody else that they are that when they're not. We need to not be played. Now, again, I'll show you this part about Rubio since we're talking about Twitter. Just the idea that this is, and we're going to start in, actually, before we get to Rubio, just showing you again that I find this very odd that you can't find Donald Trump's tweet in there. Well, I just lost it. Oh, well. But the point is, it's right there. When I showed you at the beginning, it's not showing up. I think that's by design. I think they're trying to hide things from us very clearly. Now, we're going to get into a couple of the positions we showed you before we start with which one was it? Rubio and somebody else. But first, I wanted to highlight the show we just did. Trump's deep state Zionist admin picks. And then Israel caught lying from Iran plot to Amsterdam. If you haven't seen that Iran plot, Jason put up a clip for us. It is cartoonish, just doesn't do it justice. It's incredible. Really, you got Jewish Americans who are apparently going after Jewish Americans, and this anomalous Iran entity that's in Tehran that willingly interview with the FBI, because that totally sounds like it lines up, right? They're probably talking to somebody in Tel Aviv for all we know. The bottom line is that it is not what it appears to be, and your government is, it is crazy the lengths they will go to get you to justify things that are go against your interests. War with Iran, funding Israel's genocide. This is one of the people we talked about. First, we're going to get into the technocrat side, as Jason Bassler highlights, the 5 big technocrats who funded the Trump campaign that you should know about. And we went over these already. Peter Thiel, Timothy Mellon, and Derek's article covers this as well. Miriam Adelson, David Sachs, Elon Musk. And he highlights the 4 reasons to be skeptical of Musk, which is the Pentagon contracts, SpaceX being found, connection to the CIA, the overlap with the government, family ties. He is the grandson of Joshua Haldeman, who was the leader of the Canadian Technocracy Party. All these things. It's just so crazy how much the transhumanist agenda in general. We just showed you Neuralink, World Economic Forum, brain chips, doublespeak, after vowing not to ban Elon Jet account. Remember that whole point about showing where he was going, even though it was public information? The point is he did that anyway. He claimed that he wouldn't do it. He's a free speech absolutist. Then he banned him anyway because he can do what he wants, his platform, right? And then, of course, he posted the Free Thought Project version of this article, but here's the actual TLAV original. Election 2024, the Zionist Technocrats versus Zionist Technocrats. And Caitlin Johnstone says anyone who supported Trump on anti-war grounds, with what we just showed you, but just wait till we get into the rest of it, already has more than enough evidence to stop doing so, meaning that they're not anti-war. On the surface, if you're still supporting him after his cabinet picks, even thus far, you're going to support him no matter what. No matter what he does in foreign policy, because you don't really care about peace. Now, aside for the last sentence, I agree completely. That if you're going to support it to this point, you've already committed, and I think that is partisanship in a nutshell. It's stuff like this that should make you. I don't even know how people like this have respect anywhere, even amongst people that like a Zionist movement, because it's embarrassing. He put this out, showing again this whole Marvel overlap with people we're going to highlight, some of which are so aggressively Zionist and prophetically so that it's terrifying. He says, team of the century, more stellar Trump picks, which, by the way, is even within kind of leader Republican parts of this conversation on Twitter, people are kind of freaking out because these are objectively bad picks. And I'm not talking about, like, you may agree with the people or, that they agree with their Zionist support or Israel support. But anybody objective can say that none of these picks align with what you presented this to be. Anti-war, reduction of government, the outsider, the rebel, everything is pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-genocide, pro-restriction of your rights. I'll go through it all. It's very clear. So here, first of all, is just a Forbes article if you want to read it. Trump's cabinet, here are his picks for key roles. And it goes over some of them. And we're going to go over the ones that I think are the most clearly established. But if you want to go through this is just what Forbes is saying is thus far. But remember, any of these even could change no matter how obvious they seem over the next couple of months. So one thing I want to start with is what I said earlier. I keep pointing this out. So right now, obviously, people like I post something about a comment that Rubio said about Trump. And people start going, oh, you're jumping to conclusions. And I was like, I just put an emoji on there. I think I just want to point out that this is a guy, even when being floated to somebody we shouldn't like. But of course, those same people are the ones coming out going, Thomas Massey, who went to war with AIPAC, he will be appointed as a cabinet member. I don't even think that'll happen. The point is, as of right now, and this is the most up-to-date thing, it's from the 7th, Massey, it says, here's what we know. And the point is that he is ready. He posted, he's ready and willing to help Trump as possibly Secretary of Agriculture. But to date, he does not get any discussion or any information. He doesn't, not from Trump, not from anybody. So where that came from, who knows? I think that's my point earlier about maybe people in the conservative support side of Trump that want that and are hoping by pushing it, they'll make it happen. I don't think he aligns in any way. One, because he's obviously calling out the AIPAC dynamic, and 2, because he is critical of Israel, and 3, because he goes against pretty much everything the rest of them support. Despite the lies about what you think they represent, look at their actions, look at what they do, look at who they work with, work for. They are not what Massey is. That's not even to say I believe Massey is, I don't trust any of them, frankly, because of history. But of all of them in Congress, he's one of the people that stands out the most as leaning in the directions that I would agree with. So just my point is to see that, it's easy to say he will be because you like the way that looks for people that want to push back against the current dynamic. and then shout down Rubio because you don't like that. Both are possible. Rubio seems more likely at this point. But here's Sarah Rose saying a list of the appointees so far. And this is coming from a Republican posting this about a pro side of it. So just to see, they don't list Rubio, but they do list Susan Wiles, Mike Walls, Tom Homan, Cristian, Stefanik, Huckabee, Miller, Zeldin, Musk. We're going to go through all of them. Peter, Hegseth. We already talked about Elon Musk and Ramaswamy. So here's what Whitney Webb said. Showing this from, it says, this is New York Post. Trump picks Lee Zeldin to lead the EPA. And that's who I talked about mostly yesterday. That was the main picture. Here is pro-Israel receipts showing that at least thus far, he's gotten almost $1 million from pro-Israel PACs and donations. Whitney Webb writes about that. This narrative, so there's this weird narrative that's popped up around him where they're essentially claiming he's a climate change denier, which it's so interesting to see how every choice, it continues to bolster my opinion, which is still my opinion, that this is about making you want to support Trump's administration. Right? And I'm talking about right now more Republicans than anything. Now that we're past the election dynamic, the selection, I think it's mostly aimed around convincing Republicans that all of these wildly anti-freedom, pro-Israel picks are what you want them to be. In this case, calling him a climate change denier, which, by the way, is something we should all be, yes, because the climate change dynamic is a complete manufactured illusion. Yes, we are hurting the planet, but the dynamic around the carbon, it's not, if you don't understand what I'm saying, I'm not going to dive into it now. The point is clear that what they're doing around that is a complete fabrication. But at the same time, primarily the U.S. government and others are destroying this planet with their burn pits and their using of chemicals and the dioxins and PFAS and everything else. Carbon is the manipulation. The point, though, is that saying that is to make you think that he's against that. Well, guess what? He's not. It says the narrative that he's a climate change denier is not actually true, at least not anymore. Zeldin changed his stance when he joined the Conservative Climate Caucus not too long ago. To join that group of congressmen, you agree to subscribe to the official narrative of climate change. That's interesting. So now you got a guy on the EPA who believes the climate change narrative. So that means they should be giving you a carbon tax like Elon Musk agrees. It says the caucus also participates annually in the UN climate change conferences. Zeldin is also now part of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. Also, that caucus supports carbon pricing, i.e. putting a price on carbon promotes carbon sequestration, like sequestering, like big Trump backer Elon Musk, and wants big oil and big gas to, quote, lead on curbing emissions. Not many people seem to be aware that some of the main big oil and big gas companies are major advocates for a carbon tax and carbon emission trading, something that Trump transition chair Howard Lutnick's firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, is also deeply involved in. Because it's all a game, guys. It's the whole point. It's why you find that most of these people leading the green movement are connected to this big company because they're playing you. It says several of the oil and gas companies that back Trump vocally this cycle, like Occidental Petroleum, are deeply invested in net zero and climate finance. Being pro big oil and big gas does not mean that they are against carbon pricing, because that's the game. It's about the use of that to roll you into this next step, whether that's the digital ID or the social credit overlap. And it says it's really quite the opposite at this point. Many of these market-based climate solutions are problematic, and in the case of carbon markets, rife with criminality and scams. Big oil, big gas, and Wall Street are all in. As I recently wrote, she says, the carbon market is looking increasingly likely under the new Trump administration, and Zeldin's appointment seems to point to that as well. And she cites all the points from here. You can check for yourself, but they don't want to hear it. Hopefully you're paying attention. Now, Gerald Celente says, Miriam Adelson is proving that if you have $100 million, you can pick a cabinet in the United States. Well, seems accurate. Whether you think it's her alone or not, this is an Israel first cabinet so far. There's no question. So on Stefanik, and again, see, we're kind of rapidly going through the ones we recently talked about, Zell being one of them. Stefanik is one of the most obvious. She is, as I wrote, is a Zionist, race-baiting, genocide-supporting cartoon of a person, like far too many in Trump's orbit. And as even Haaretz said, they trapped her as the U.S. ambassador to the UN. As Max jokingly pointed out, which Trump now gave Israel 2 representatives to the United Nations, right? She, of course, as well, almost $1 million. Funny how they all seem to be getting paid for Israel. I wonder how that lines up. And here is the Hodge twins. Right? So this is somebody who is pro-Trump for the most part. and is calling out this point, which I'm happy to see that people have principles, integrity, willingness to call these things out, even though that goes against Trump's agenda, pro-Trump, anything. This should matter to you if you are America first. And as they wrote, does this sound like America first to you all? And we showed you this before. This is alarming. This is her going to Israel not too long ago and speaking. And this is what she said to the Israeli government. Why that even is the case, unless you're the president, is beyond me. Unless you recognize how obviously Israel is influencing and not controlling U.S. policy.
Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home and supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil.
No conditions, right? So whatever they do, it doesn't matter. And crushing anti-Semitism. So again, for the 1,000th time, saying this does not mean I'm supporting anti-Semitism. The point is that if you believe in free speech, then you have to support the idea that that's protected. And yes, I'll be right there with you saying if you call somebody disgusting because of their religion, then you're a bad person. And I'm happy to go, yep, you suck. You're disgusting. But I'll stand there and support your right to express and to feel to think these things. Whether you want to believe you support Hamas or support ISIS. You're not breaking the law by having an opinion. You're not breaking the law by expressing these things out loud. But we have the right to call you ridiculous and say you're dangerous. The point is that what she is saying, without question, is unconstitutional. Now, what's important, somebody even made this comment about this higher side chats discussion, that I say without question too much. Well, realize there are some things without question. Sort of like the idea that your constitutional rights are inherent. That's without question, in my opinion. But I can still say with my opinion, but I do agree with that. Or that this is without question unconstitutional because you can't, like the burning flag point, which I'll make again in a second. You can disagree that it should be that way. And I'm happy to have that conversation. Maybe you'll even convince me, but you can't pretend that it isn't protected by an inherent right to do so, especially since the Supreme Court has ruled more than once that is the case. Just because you don't like it, that means you're a hypocrite. That means you're just as bad as the left. It's the woke right. It's the same thing in very different ways. So she's telling you we're going to crush anti-Semitism. She is speaking to a foreign government and saying we are going to stop Americans from expressing their free speech for you. And that's who Trump just picked. Now, whether she becomes that or not is up for debate. We'll wait and see. But I agree with Hodge Twins. That doesn't sound like it is not America first. Here she is recently. This is yesterday, guys. So she's not even in position yet, and she's already flown to Israel to see the president of Israel. And it says, this morning I met with my good friend, President Herzog, the guy who's lied like 16 times about all these horrific things in Israel. Well, first of all, of course, they all lied about the Hannibal directive and killing their own people, lied about people that were killed, lied about babies in ovens, lied about rape, lied about all of it. And then on top of that, has lied about chemical weapons instructions that turned out to be a book from Amazon, or a argument about how 1, 2, 3 steps on how to rape somebody, like things that have been definitively proven to be outright fabrications. But who cares though, right? Because she's pro-Israel. That's all that matters, right? We discussed the need to continue the fight against anti-Semitism. Again, the fight against something that you have a constitutional right to think and feel. And on top of that, as much as I would say it is disgusting, they overlap with things that aren't anti-Semitism, as we all should know. Sort of like saying from the river to the sea, or simply believing in Palestine. Or protesting against the genocide, all of which by the ADL and Israel and Stefanik have publicly, personally called anti-Semitism. All of which, without question, is protected by your inherent rights of the Constitution. Or really outlined by the Constitution. But here she is. And I'm going to play pretty much all those clips in a minute from Trump. It's important for you to see it in all one spot. And she says, and President Trump's record as the strongest American president in history when it comes to standing with Israel. Now, think about saying that while the world sees them committing genocide. You're either compromised or you're that pro-Zionist, and that's scary. It says, it has never been more important to stand with our most precious ally. What precious? What are we in the Lord of the Rings now? The most precious ally. These are creepy things, guys. The President Trump's for America first, peace through strength foreign policy. None of this is America first. The fact that she flew is there. I mean, it's alarming to me. Here she is on yesterday as well. Day 402. So she's going day by day now. It's been 402 days, she says, since Hamas terrorists, the ones Israel funds, abducted innocent civilians, many of which were killed by Israel on the way back, and in the barbaric October 7th attack. The protected right of resistance that was completely under international law compliant, except for the crimes they committed around it, without question. There are over 100 still being held in hostages in Gaza, including 7 Americans, she says, which I think I might even respond to this earlier, maybe not. The point, again, I said, I think it was day 400. She said the same thing. I responded to it, which is it's strange that you only care about the 7 Americans that are Israeli Americans, as opposed to the over 600 Americans that are both just Americans and Palestinian Americans that were there since October 7th. But see, this is the point you can't miss. She doesn't care about Americans. She cares about Israeli Americans. So if I can prove, and I have, there are Americans that were trapped in Gaza. She didn't care. She's never mentioned it once. There are Americans that were like Jeffrey the Freighter that were held by Israel. She didn't speak up, but she will scream about the IDF members that are being held as POWs as Israeli Americans. And that's it. She doesn't care about anybody else being bombed by Israel, being killed, being raped, being tortured, being dismantled, being shredded, children or women. She doesn't care about the 600 Americans that were in Gaza. So she only cares about the Israeli part of this. There's really no debate. And Zachary Foster says, continually emphasizing the plight of the Israeli hostages while ignoring the plight of the Palestinian hostages, which have been outlined by the UN, by international groups for years. The tens of thousands of innocent people being held in administrative detention in Israel without charge, people getting released after 20 years with no charge. Meaning that they were never, if there's no charge, they weren't a criminal. It doesn't matter. They've been holding people we're talking children. People that get arrested when they're children and get released when they're in their 20s. We've seen at least 4 examples of that during this time frame. And she doesn't talk about them because it's not about law. It's about Israel. And he goes, it has a name, doing what you're doing. It's called racism. You're a racist, Elise. He's right. Now, Jason Bastler puts out a meme. Now, to be clear, some of these are, definitive, right? But he says, anyone notice a pattern? Susie Wiles, Deputy Chief of Policy, National Security Advisor. We're going to go through most of these. The reality is, he says, what's swamp? These are federally protected wetlands. That's funny. The joke is that all of these people are exactly, as he says underneath it, big pharma lobbyist, anti-immigration project, 2025 advocate, Cheney protege, pro-Israel war hawk, deep state, avid Zionist. All of these people are the opposite of what was promised. Every single one of them to a man. Now, interestingly enough, Ron Paul said this. I find this to be, I'll start with the joke. I said, boy, that escalated quickly from the anchor man because it's all of a sudden Ron Paul, the one who they were pretending, and even still now is like on his administration, and maybe that will change. Here's what he said. Yesterday was a bad day for those who endorse America first in our foreign policy. And he put America first in quotes. With reported Trump appointments of neocons, Stefanik, Mike Waltz, Marco Rubio, and many who helped the Trump 2.0, hope that Trump 2.0 would be different, are feeling dejected and betrayed. And really, guys, if you look, there's a lot of pretty prominent Republicans that are going, this is bad. It's not happening. He goes, is there hope left? Now he talks about a 30-minute clip you can watch for yourself. But I just think it's interesting to see and important to recognize that a lot of people are calling this stuff out. And of course, RFK Jr. put something up that talks about helping Trump's appointee, the decisions for Trump's appointees. Oops, apologize for that. I think I hit the mute button. So the point here is that basically, after everything we just saw, all the people that we got picked, this to me is embarrassing almost. It is placation. And again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope this shifts and changes in the next 3 months. Not looking good. Because all we have to do is based on what we can see, guys. And what we can see is pretty clear. But this says RFK Jr. launched a forum. The same point they made about forums earlier in the other context. It's the same thing, in my opinion. For the public to nominate members of the Trump administration. Remember, the other one was the forum for the efficiency stuff and what we're doing. And you tell us what you think. It says, as he helps lead, which I'm not seeing, unless he is, and this shows you who he really is, lead his White House transition team, the long-term environmental lawyer and health activist created a public website for you to write in your favorite candidates. How's that working out? President Trump, it says, in quotes, has asked Bobby to help drain the swamp by giving him an influential leadership role in the transition team. Trump has stated that he was not able to drain the swamp in his first term, but wait a minute. That's what they said they did. So it's funny how up until now they were saying, we did it, right? We did it. That's what we did, except now we didn't do it yet because it's sort of like make America great again. Or I remember the first tagline I tried to roll out last time was make America great. What was it? Make America great. What was it? Nah, it doesn't matter. The point was it was redundant and I thought it was funny and they quickly changed it. My point here is that they're claiming they already succeeded, like Trump defeated ISIS. Now we're going to fight him again. These are all narratives and it's so transparent. He didn't drain the swamp, guys. He did everything the opposite, just like he's doing now. And so now you're going to help him do that? In what way? Will you demonstrate one pick so far that demonstrates the opposite, the draining of the swamp? And even ask yourself, why does picking people who aren't the swamp drain the swamp? It doesn't. They're all still circulating around and they'll all be picked and put in. Most likely they're going to end up in some unelected position that Trump puts them in that we don't see. Either way, this seems to be pretty silly to me. And I think it's about trying to convince you that that your statements make a difference. And more so than that, make you believe that whatever happens next is what you chose. That somehow that is the draining of the swamp because he was involved, even though it's the exact opposite. Now, talking about Marco Rubio. Now, again, one of the ones that seem to be not necessarily, of all of them, the least definitive, right? The least definitive. And I think what's interesting, though, is as I showed you the clip earlier, Israel and their media, they're all acting like this has already happened. So we'll have to see. But to be clear, of all of them, this one's the least definitive. Trump expected to tap Marco Rubio, says Reuters. This was yesterday. Rich People Weekly points out what Donald Trump said in 2015. There's a lot of these. He said Sheldon Adelson, which Miriam Adelson is his wife. He passed away. Both still driving influence for Israel. Adelson is looking to give big dollars to Rubio because he feels he can mold him into his perfect little puppet. I agree. Look at that. Isn't that interesting? And now Miriam's giving him money, $100 million. Not for the first time. But Rich People Weekly says this was actually an endorsement if you read it in the proper context. It's interesting. I happen to agree. Here is Rubio, of course, also over $1 million from Israel. Now, again, I believe this is just, so it's 1990 to 2024, and this is not all-encompassing, by the way, showing you obvious money coming in. Now, Sam Husseini writes, Marco Rubio was still lying about the Iraq invasion in 2016. At the last Republican debate, he attempted to justify George Bush invading Iraq, saying, quote, no matter what you want to say about weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein was in violation of UN resolutions. In open violation. Oh, yeah. So the most obvious crime. I mean, the idea that we can prove they lied about that, destroyed the entire country, stole as much as they could. I mean, going back to Galloway and the oil for food program. I mean, everything about what they did was a lie. Destroyed these people's lives, killed over 1 million people, 500,000 of them children, and it was worth it to them. And he's still here trying to lie about this to rationalize that choice. That's the people we're talking about. Now, I have a clip, actually, I'll have to go play. Sam Husseini just pointing out that these people are the opposite. They are exactly what the lie. They represent exactly what Trump pretends he's pushing against. Now, here is Alex Jones talking with Rubio. Now, his point he makes here, and you've seen the clip. I think he's calling him a frat boy, and it's weirdly uncomfortable. For me, frankly, it kind of feels almost like it's staged. You can decide for yourself. But Alex is there kind of pushing back on him in a kind of a, which I find entertaining, but lacking decorum and the usual dynamic of, media, which who cares? Who says we're supposed to respect what they tell us how we're supposed to act? Either way, the point is he's kind of calling him a frat boy and saying, you know who I am. And he's like, I don't know who you are. And it's weird. It's weird. The point is he's hating on him. David Knight says, put Alex Jones in an awkward position. So should he actually pick Rubio? It's going to be very interesting. He says, does he criticize Trump for Rubio? Does he tell us it's 4D chess? Go back to sleep? Which is what you'll usually get. There's some kind of a deeper move that we can't see, whatever. And it says, look to Alex lies during the pandemic and stop the steal to see what he'll do next. No matter how fake the lies, MAGA will always excuse Trump and Alex Jones. Remember, he called his vaccine sugar water. I mean, David Knight, of all people, have really gone to town on this. Here's Medea Benjamin pointing out that in his office right now, Rubio has an Israeli flag in front of his office. I find that to be strange. You could support them blindly, but to put up an Israeli flag and you don't put up a flag of everybody, I mean, there's plenty of other things going on. What about the Sudan? They're struggling too. You put a flag up for them? No, because it's bigger than that, and we all know it. Here's Dan Cohen highlighting 2 minutes of Rubio denouncing Trump as a con artist. So when he gets picked, if he gets picked, Same thing as Vance and the rest of them, calling Trump a loser and a bad guy. And all of a sudden, now we're the best thing in the world. We're going to save the country. And maybe that's the case. But you should at least be honest enough to acknowledge that this is becoming, I mean, it's concerning, obviously, that every single person they're putting, they all seem to be 30 seconds ago saying how bad he was. Even RFK Jr. was making fun of him, saying he was going to ruin the country until suddenly telling you he's going to save it. I find that strange.
There is no way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement, and Donald Trump is a con artist.
Donald Trump is a con artist.
He's a con man. I think it's time to unmask him for what he is. A con man who's taking advantage of people's fears and anxieties about the future, portraying himself as some sort of strong guy. He's not a strong guy.
He doesn't sweat. He doesn't sweat because his pores are clogged from the spray tan that he used. You all have friends that are thinking about voting for Donald Trump. Friends, do not let friends vote for con artists.
We're about to turn over the conservative movement to a person that has no ideas of any substance on the important issues, the nuclear codes of the United States, to an erratic individual.
So we cannot allow the conservative movement to be taken over by a con artist. How can the